guess I'm handing it off to Amanda first.
Don't sound so shocked. All right, so let's see. There we go. Transitioning on here. So basically we'll go through the general funds, some tax rate analysis, in which I'll kick it over to Sean. Some nonprofit funding, then we'll go into the water sewer funds, stormwater, electric funds, some important dates, and comments and questions. So as similar in the past, we've got this icon off to the side, and if that's on the slide, then that's kind of a decision point, and we would need some direction account or consensus from you all, so we know kind of how to proceed. Budget highlights. So we're looking at 101.9 million in general fund. Electric fund is just under 52. Water sewer is just under 29. Stormwater will be separated out into its own separate fund this year, as opposed to being captured with water sewer. And that'll be 2.6 million. And then we've got just over 27 in our non-major and capital fund expenditures. So we are balanced currently at 44 cents. That is a tax rate increase of 3%. Electric, we're looking at an increase of 5.5%. We had originally talked about 4%, and that would be the bare minimum that we knew we would need in order to balance out with rate increases coming through. And then water sewer both have 4% volumetric rates increases, and sewer has a 4% base rate increase, with the water base rate staying flat.
Is the stormwater fund separation just transparency, or are there other advantages to do that?
So that was Antoine call. So that we would create a separate stormwater fund because it's a separate utility.
Okay.
So doesn't that kind of limit our options though? Because right now it's part of water and sewer, right?
We're not limit drop because we want to make sure that the stormwater is covered, stormwater expenses. And so it's easier for us to form that analysis. I'm looking at those expenses, looking at the revenue to compare it. Is the rate set properly? So it just helps us with the project reporting on and to make sure that that utility fund is actually self-supporting.
Specifically in terms of fund balance and capital reserves for future.
We did, even within, it will, transparency is kind of, it wasn't done for that. It will be kind of a benefit of that. It'll be easier to see, but it was already separated out in the water and sewer fund anyway, like kind of division wise. And part of that was because as it was starting up to make sure everything would be covered. But now we're through a year, it does, to Antoine's point, it definitely helps with the reserve piece and tracking and monitoring that, okay, which is definitely clear on. And so we already had it separated out to show what Antoine was saying. It would just be even a little bit cleaner to show now. Now it's kind of got its own legs, really. Before it was so new, trying to start it up. And if you were in a fund and it came up short, we had an option. Then we had some coverage. Okay, yeah. Now we're seeing where it is. We know what's going on. We can put it on its own, because you want it to be a self-sustaining utility. I mean, that was the purpose of setting it up.
Purposely limited, like to your question. I guess even legally it has to be limited to that usage, right?
Yeah. So right now it's legally limited to anything water.
No, I don't think it ever was that.
No, it's
always
yeah,
water the whole time.
Yeah, because even that's what I say. Even with the stormwater fund, it had its own line items that we contracted.
As an enterprise, so it's supported. Yeah. It's propped up by those rates and fees.
Thanks.
Just kind of the team's view on the cover on the screen. So in terms of our revenue summary, so we're looking at 101.9. So this is it appears to be a decrease over the FY23 amended budget by 3.7%. If we remove fund balance allocation for FY23 and FY24, it's actually a 9.67% increase. Part of that is tied to the additional 3 cents. But this, because we have about 17 million allocated right now in fund balance, so that's artificially inflating the FY23 budget numbers.
Can you repeat it for me?
So basically, when you remove the fund balance from FY23 and the FY24, it's actually showing an increase of the just over $9 million and revenues, increased revenues, because 1 cent on the tax rate equates to about $1.2 million. So part of that is tied to that tax increase. But the other part is, the reason why that's important is because we have about 17 million in fund balance allocated for this fiscal year in the amended budget through PO carryovers and budget amendments, and then allocated fund balance that we budgeted for last fiscal year. So you want to make sure that we're showing like, hey, yes, we're increasing, but the appearance is it's decreasing just because that abnormally large fund balance amount.
And so in the larger package that's not in the slides here, and just for clarification, for context, there's the FY 22-23 budget of 105.5, and then the FY 22-23 estimate, which is more in the range of 95.8. But the $10 million difference, right? So what's driving this $10 million variance between our budget and the estimates?
So use of fund balance.
And then, so what are we driving? So when we say the budget increases by X percent, what number are we using? Are we using actuals or are we using?
So we're using the amended budget. So this is for the amended budget because basically that the authorization to spend is there. So theoretically, we could spend up to that amount. We don't anticipate using all of that. Part of that is because it's tied to PO carryovers from the prior fiscal year. And so that's over 6 billion of kind of that core. Some of it is tied to things that we'll reimburse ourselves for, like Mason Street. We allocated 2.6, I think. Well, 6 because of the bond.
Yeah. That's a good portion.
But that we did that as the bond as a revenue. And then the other 2.6, I believe, from fund balance. So we'll reimburse ourselves for that through our financing. So there are certain things that we don't necessarily anticipate spending, but it's been allocated. So we do it based off of the amended budget because the year end, the estimates we do are typically early, but we try not to spend if we don't have to. And then we'll also have different numbers that will come in under in terms of our expenditures. So we're not going to expend every single line out of every single department at 100%. So we look at that too.
Yeah, so I'm kind of curious why we're using the amended budget then as our baseline for compare, because if that's not really what we're spending, right, shouldn't we be looking at what we're actually planning on spending and then make sure the budget is in certain increments from that, because it just sways the numbers significantly.
June 30th.
So, Mr. We do use the recommend. When we report out at this phase, we just amended because like Amanda said, that's what has been allocated. That's what's there. There's still a lot of fluctuation between even now that we're almost 11 months into the year, 10.5 months into our fiscal year. The last 2 months, there will still be a lot of fluctuations. There'll be fluctuations even through August because we still pay back into this fiscal year through things received through August, or maybe we're going to July now, right? But so that fluctuation is there. We do look at that with the budget. That's why you do see that the charts that you have in the full budget document do look at what the expected is. And Amanda and Jessica and their team and Antoine, they work together to estimate those out. But it's an estimation. It goes up and it can change. When we look at what budget items should be, yes, we do try and look at those as well. But for consistency's sake, when we look at the totals, we look at this is what the amended budget was. This is what you said, or what Gallo's allocated to the budget. So that's the direct comparison. Once we're finished with this year, yes, we use actuals as much as we can. That's all the other numbers are the actuals, and plug that in. So all the models are built off the actuals once we get them. The models in for the rates and everything else that we use, we try and use what we expect to. We're careful on that because, again, there's a lot of unknowns still. We're usually pretty close on it, but this gives us the worst case scenario as well. And if you beat the worst case scenario, then we're sitting in a good situation coming in and not the other way around.
Go.
All right. So this is one thing that we did go through with finance committee, and that's our general fund revenue total. So this is before we programmed in the tax rate increase. So this is looking at our revenue sources over time. So we're seeing, like, we saw that kind of increase, but we're really starting to see most of them flatten out and other revenues declining, especially on the development side. So with that, this general fund summary identifies what we have programmed into the budget with those increases. So you are seeing the largest increase there with the ad valorem taxes, and that's tied to the tax rate increase. That, and well, I guess technically the largest is the investment earnings, and that's going to be tied to interest rates.
So can we talk about the fund balance for a moment, like what they use of the funds to balance the plan here? So over the last couple of years, or at least this year and next year, we're taking significant chunks out of our fund balance. So basically what we're saying is that our budget as is not sustainable, right? Because we're relying on our reserves to make ends meet, basically.
So not necessarily, because we don't typically. So when the hard part is when we allocate fund balance, it's typically for a one-time expenditure or a capital project or a capital purchase. So typically when we do fund balance appropriations, it's typically tied to a capital project. So when we get to that, we can show that. The only difference with that is, or caveat, I guess I'd say, is the PO carryovers. So PO carryovers can be tied to, operating expenses as well. So we have contracts and things that will carry over into the new fiscal year. Sometimes if it closes or something's backordered, if it takes us 12 to 18 months to get a police car, and then that PO is going to be carried over, and then it's closed kind of when it's received. But the appearance is that we're continuing to allocate fund balance, but it's not necessarily fund balance. That money was already allocated in the operating budget. It's just carrying over to meet those commitments, prior commitments.
We have a couple, you'll have, and Amanda's going to handle, there's another fund balance discussion a little
Yes.
later.
Okay.
And so,
I'll make.
okay.
With the future looking.
Yeah,
right?
and and real quick there to carry on, this is an aggregate fund balance, like you see at 17.9. The fund balance that we talk about in general otherwise is available fund balance. And so there's two different numbers there. Amanda's talking about the PO carryover. That's an encumbered amount of money already. That is not captured. When we talk about available fund balance, that is not in that number. That's a committed payment at that point. So when we talk about, oh, hey, you have 43 million fund balance or whatever, I think that's what it is when we get there. That's excluding the PO, that's already accounted for elsewhere. So we actually have a bigger fund balance number that's closer to 60 some million. But when we talk to y'all, we talk about the available fund balance because there's 4 classes of fund balance. You have restricted, committed, assigned, and unassigned. Available that we talk about is only assigned and unassigned. So the restricted and committed, those are mandates that are in there, either general statute, or the committed is something that maybe you as a council has already, there's an ordinance, a resolution or something that's been passed that fund that's there. You're not going to change what that can be used for without some, legislative action.
So how would we know where that 4.7 is coming from then, right? Because it's to your point, that may have already been committed or appropriated somehow. It's not a net reduction of our available fund balance.
For the budget.
Yeah, we calculate that into our available fund balance. Like, so we'll give you a number for what coming year, what we expect it to be, and we back that in. So we account for the 4.7 as far as what it's specifically used for. It's in there. It's in the budget. We point
Right,
that out.
but my point is like we're relying on reserves to make our budget meet right now.
And not operating. So to Amanda's point, it's only capital. It's only one-time things. We do not use it for operating. We strategically plan for the use of fund balances reserves as it's a savings. So it's like we saved up for this project. Now we're going to use it because you don't want your reserves to get too high anyway. We can't. You're just sitting on it. And you're not serving the public, the community like you want to. That's a discussion we have a lot with this council. And that's why we talk about, that's why we have a goal of 25% where we try to get to that council set. So anything above that is open for those. All that's planned in here. So when we show you the number we've accounted for those things. I think Antoine has some.
It's a testament to previous administration and previous council that they didn't spend money that they didn't need to spend. So we've been able to bank these funds so that we don't have to raise taxes 10 cents. We can raise taxes 3
Yeah,
cents.
and I appreciate all of that, right? But if we continue at this rate of pace, like in 2 years' time, we're gonna be at that 25% mark and we're out of reserves to appropriate, right? And so like kudos to previous council for say, creating savings accounts. I don't want to be the council that goes spend it all, right? Unless we have very good reasons to do so.
You can be out of reserves if you keep that pace. If, one of the things that we'll look at, one of the things that we try and show you in the CIP models, this is where it shows up, is we show you what can happen if you do spend and go to that. But we also don't recommend, we only recommend uses that keep us within, above the policy where we are. And you'll notice, and I've been through this several times and mentioned this to us, is we're very conservative on even what we recommend using. And y'all have asked that, Mr.
Yeah, right there.
Yeah.
Budget,
And then-
2022.
And it's like, why don't we,
18 million.
they want to use, let's use more, let's do more. And we can. And those are the options that we want to make sure we provide to you. So when we talk about the projects that are, hey, we still have fund balance if you want to do this, and we leave that. When we prepare the budget and present a plan, and Katie and Amanda and I come together, Antoine, we take counsel, we're going to present you a conservative budget plan that keeps us within those guardrails that policies have set. It also gives you the flexibility to spend some more things if you want to. We will continue to report the numbers out so you have an idea of where we're headed, what the trend is. So yes, we're going to show you in a little bit. There's about 43 million in fund balance. And you're going to see there's a pretty good number we can have. Now, we're planning to use maybe 6 of that this year, estimate, and then 4 next year. So you got to keep that in mind, and then you'll still see what's remaining. And if you want to do something with it, you have that ability to do so. So trust us that we're not going to let us go through. We will make sure that we're communicating that information. If it looks like we're headed down even further, then we'll say, hey, here's the flag. Let's talk about what's going on, what we're seeing, what's happening. To Antoine's point, we're in a good situation, and and that's to credit to council's past, current council as you go, and some credit also to operations and how we manage things. That's why what you see usually as the estimate is typically lower than the amended budget, because we budget on the worst case scenario. We have to have a balanced budget, and so we budget and plan for it. We use it all, and then there's a lot of times that we come in under, and we're thankful for that. But at the same time, it's a delicate balance in making sure that we're still providing the level of service that the community deserves and wants, and doing the things that council wants to see done for our residents too. So there's a little bit, it's a balance there. It's not always as clear as we'd like it to be, but we try and make sure that we err on the side of caution versus the other way around.
And we do add back to that fund balance
Yes.
annually. So everything that, basically when we close the fiscal year, anything that we didn't spend that fiscal year goes back to that fund balance and adds to it. So it's, us being conservative on the expenditure side and really, determining best use of funds, but then also on the revenue side, being conservative enough that we're not overestimating revenues and, spending in a deficit.
Right.
So.
No, listen, I'm appreciative being conservative and all that, but coming in under budget is not always a good thing either, right? Because that means that you have room to deliver services that we did not deliver. We didn't hire that extra police officer, or we didn't, invest in that greenway, right? Where we could have, right, given the money available to us. So, all right, I don't want to derail the whole conversation right now, but just wanted to double-click on it. Thank you.
So with this, sorry, there's a lag between my computer and this. So with this is the tax rate change that was discussed at the meeting. So this really kind of groups those items together and the dollar amounts associated with them, tied back to public safety, parks and recreation, cultural resources, and then other initiatives, which I think is the direction that you all have provided. So you're able to kind of see where that pot of money is kind of going. Are there any questions on this?
I think, in prior years, I don't know if it's in this budget, we've had sort of a list of like, if we had another half penny or penny, what would be the recommendations of staff for that? Right. I think we didn't really have this conversation that much this year because right off the bat, we said 3 cents. It's a good amount. But I like seeing that. I think that's good information for us to have in general. It's like, what are the next $500,000 I got cut off?
It's actually in your workbook. It's not.
We didn't include it in the workbook. I emailed it. I emailed it separately. So when I emailed the link with the budget, there was attachments and one of them was the budget addition. So new things that were brand new to the budget this fiscal year. And then also some of the reductions, and that didn't include everything like, maintenance and repair vehicle, et cetera.
But within that list, Mr. Happy, it's not as specific maybe as in years past. It was a much broader list, a much bigger list this year. So it wasn't to the point where staff said, okay, here's for my basketball reference. It's not first 4 in, first 4 out, last 4 out.
I see, yeah.
Yeah, but it's the general list. So it's kind of like the menu of options, if you will, that a council, that's how we decided this year. You could see what was maybe went through, because it was a little bit of it was a challenging year. So it was hard to prioritize specifically some of those from staff perspective on there. I mean, we were working on using Game Plan Apex as that overall guideline, right? So we framed everything in terms of, hey, here's the overall theme, here's the art, where it's headed. Then from the policy decision, if you say, well, we want to put the priority on environmental leadership, or we want to put the priority on economic vitality, whichever one we're picking, then we know we can go to that list of start. That's the kind of general guidance we from you. Just overall, what do you want to do, and then we'll kind of take it.
So this is the list of items requested by staff that ultimately did not make it into the budget.
That's correct.
Okay, that's great.
And just, I kind of piggyback off of something that Councilman Mahaffey mentioned, but it was something that I thought about when I read this thing. Is 3 cents the right number from staff's perspective?
That was from us.
So I know that was from us. I know that was from us. What I'm asking is that the right number from staff's perspective?
It's
The right number is whatever y'all said.
Right. Well, I mean, I understand it's, it's kind of like if someone tells me, hey, you can have a cookie. And I'm like, well, chocolate chip or oatmeal.
Right.
You can say, I like oatmeal. That doesn't mean I like oatmeal.
But so I think what we try and do is,
He's gonna be diplomatic here.
yeah.
It is not gonna be
So in
a.
fact,
gonna be a
Okay,
so-
fine.
So in my
That's the list of
yeah.
things that didn't.
Don't tap dance. Don't
So
tap
my
dance.
6 years here, my 5 years now with Miss Killingsworth, she knows where I'm headed on this. So,
No, yeah,
yeah.
you don't have to tap dance. I was
Yeah.
just trying to get a sense as to.
So, yeah, our goal is to get in as much as
Yeah.
council wants to see as possible.
Right.
To some of the questions Mr. Zegerman has is, from an operating standpoint, we set that as our baseline. We feel like we can work within what's there. And so when we start our budgeting process, like we are starting with the existing tax rate. That's where we start from. And so within that, okay, yeah, we can operate. We're not necessarily adding anything new. We're not doing this. I mean, so we can continue on as is. So it's all about what do you want to add new? And so for us to say, okay, well, I mean, we can, when we get to the tax rate analysis a little bit later on, there's that opportunity to say, we can show you, hey, if you want to do all this, and that's about as close as I can get to you on what the staff's recommendation is. Like, here's what it would take to do all of this. Specifically what that amount is. Look, there's a lot of great things, and we try and we use Game Plan Apex. We use what we hear from you. We hear from the citizen survey, where our discussions with staff, guidance from Katie, and we try and put all that together. But ultimately, we feel that when we have that baseline, we're operating. If we had to go this year, we're not going backwards, so we're good. If you want to do these extra things, it's just it's trying to put it all together. And I hate to say what is the staff's recommendation on that, because we have 20 different directors and everyone wants a little bit different money, has a different idea of what that priority is.
No, I appreciate the answer, Sean, because I think when I asked the same question last year, you gave me verbatim the same answer. As you did last
He's
year.
nothing if not consistent.
Right, consistency, I appreciate,
So,
but I figured I'd.
yeah, and so we want
see
to
what's
continue to operate. We want to show you here's what it would take to do it. We also, that's where we bring in the fund balance there sometimes, so you don't have to raise the tax rate, right? So like we said, sometimes if you want to, great. If you want to balance that,
Just depends on what we want to do. If we want to add more staff from the list or more equipment or more,
Or infrastructure,
That's
or
right.
more sidewalks, or more
whatever it
trees, or-
is.
That's right, yeah, because there's always gonna be, there's always gonna be a very, technical aspect into this is like, you want $3 more million, you add 2 more. I mean, it's in terms of simplicity, but we also understand that there is a political caveat that y'all have to consider, that it's a little bit different, and so we work through that. So there's a tolerance, so there's, hey, this is what can be done, but then there's a tolerance piece that the community has, that you have, that even staff has, that we have to work through. And it's understanding that balance that we try and, we come to you with, and that's a balance of using fund balance, it's a balance of what the tax rate may be. And you've always heard me, those of you who've been here, heard me say, we can do just about everything. You just can't do, we can do just about anything. You can't do everything, right? And so that's the balance that we try and strike.
So maybe asking the question a little bit differently. So I appreciate your comment about using fund balance to kind of use the tax increases, right? Like it's kind of a buffer against tax increase, and which is great. So, but it's also not sustainable because at some point, we're going to run out of savings.
That's right.
So based on history, like you guys been to the town a lot longer than I have, right? Do you kind of feel like we're on the bubble with our spending and sort of, to kind of catching up with our growth, and as things kind of level off a little bit, so will our budget, and it becomes more self-sustainable, not relying on reserves?
Um,
To a certain extent, you're gonna always have rely on reserves because we're using it for those one-time expenses. If it exceeds that 25%, you can talk about.
Also, 138 million is what this capital project has for future spending. I mean, there are a lot of needs.
there's always, there's always gonna be needs.
Yes, so, but again, like need is one thing, right? Having the means to do them, because, so we set a target of 25% of fund reserve, right? We're at 43% right now, great, right? We are looking sharp. We go spend that money, right? Now we're at 25%, right? And then what? Like the needs will not go away, right?
So,
Well, I mean, presumably, $18 million in one way. We spent 18 million to reduce it from,
I think,
like, we have a backlog of $300 million projects.
Right.
And we have a bank account that has an extra $20 million in it.
Right.
So the question is, how much of that 20 million should you turn into projects? $0, $2 million? An argument can be made that we should turn the entire balance of our fund balance above our policy level into stuff for people to have and use.
Right. But
Like,
at what
it's
point
doing no one any good.
catch up again, right?
that year would be amazing, by the way, if we did that.
Yeah, but what we would do is we would stop spending money on projects at some point. Like, it's not like we would continue to spend $20 million a year on random projects. We don't have the available funds above our policy level and say, oh, I guess we don't build that $10 million road today. We wait till later. But Sean hinted on earlier, like there's a perspective that we set a policy level for what the fund balance should be, 25% of our general fund, which is our general fund being about 100 million now, so it's about $25 million. The state minimum is 8%, right? So
that is the legal.
It should be higher.
LGC is gonna send you a letter if you start dropping below your peer group, which is
Right,
what our
okay.
peer group is about.
So yes, we've set a policy generously above that, and then we are almost double that. So our policy is to have $25 million, we have $43 million. Like, we should lower an argument can be made that we should lower the rate and burn down that money naturally, or spend it all on this backlog of $300 million of projects that we have, because those projects are not getting cheaper. Right? Like, the interest we earn on the money in the bank is probably less than the increased costs on building a road. So we have to.
If I might try and give a shot at what you're asking, I think, and so real quick on the fund balance piece, thank you, Antoine. The tool we use, as you just heard, we may not even use it. In a lot of cases, we have it because we'll budget fund balance for those one-off things to try and balance tax rate. And then I haven't been here a year. We have not been positive at the end of the year, but actually put money back in, even when we budgeted fund balance. So, we don't always use it. That's why we look for those actions. To your point, if I'm hearing you, maybe make sure I'm hearing you correctly on kind of what's sustainable financially moving forward. This is my assessment. So take that as in 6 years through here, we have left money on the table the last 5 years. And when I say that, it may be before that. I'm talking just in observations where we could have spent more. And so we put some money into fund balance. And so to kind of counter that, we've tried to budget a little more fund balance, and we still did okay. So from that aspect, yeah, it's been sustainable because we put money in reserve and positive. We could have maybe even used either more fund balance, or we may have had capacity to maybe a little more liberal on our budget estimates and analysis, but it's kind of go against the grain of financing budget what we do. So we've left that. The reality of where we are now, though, this year is what I tried to speak with y'all about previously when we looked at our growth impact. And so that's the part where kind of a confluence of variables with, we're still growing, but it's at basically half the rate of where we were. Then you throw in the inflation factors, the volatility in the market. So for instance, the fact that we may use around 95, 96 million as our actual estimate this year, hopefully I think we'll be pretty close to that, but then we're budgeting just over 100, about 6, 7, it's about a 6% difference, right? Just in that it's an increase of 6%. Well, if you adjust for inflation, this graph's not in here, but it's in the budget workbook. If you adjust for inflation, over a trend, we look at a 10-year trend of inflation, our budget is basically flat with this past year, adjusting for inflation, despite that nominally it is up about 6%. Well, what has been the inflation that we've been hearing in the news? It's been about 6%. Now, that's not an apples to apples, I get that. But the point is we had to increase tax rate on this budget to get the revenue up to basically hold where we were. Now, we've added some new things in, but our value is not getting a lot. Like we had to generate more revenue to get the same value dollar-wise from last year. And so we are, in my assessment, and that sustainability piece is, yes, we are trying to be careful moving forward, because I think we need to see how really this year, next year with reval, and in my opinion, the following year, how we come out of whatever's going on with the economy, recession, soft landing, full recession, whatever it may be. We're not economists, we don't project that, but we try and listen to it. But we can look and observe, and we do know that our AB growth rate was half of what it has been. So we're looking at that. We do know we have market pressure that we have to, just like anyone else, we shop in the market just like anyone else. We don't get different needs. And so really the next 2 to 3 years are going to be a guide on what that sustainability is in terms of, is this tax rate the right tax rate to keep operations up? How much fund balance can you use? Because no, we're not going to budget fund balance for operational needs. But it's how much can you do? And we probably could have done more with some of that fund balance, or even within the budget over the last few years, that we didn't quite get to. We have thoughts on maybe some policies moving forward about when we do have reserves, what those reserves get used for as a standing policy from council. Like, hey, we had when we get our actuals and we give our final audit report, we had 6 million in reserves. Is there a policy that says, okay, X% of that goes to stays in reserves? X% of that goes to some projects that we had identified, and X% maybe goes to a debt fund, which is a recognition we're trusting them. So we're preparing for the next bond, whatever, without having to maybe raise the tax rate. So we're looking at policies like that, because we're at a point where the growth just allowed it to be sustainable without trying to do a whole lot. But we're coming with the growth declining. There are concerns about, okay, what is the tax rate? What is the proper usage of fund balance? And where do they crawl? Where do they intersect?
Right. And so I'm just kind of wondering, like, where are we going to level up?
Right.
I will freely agree that 43% in your fund balance is too much, right? Because that means, to your point, leaving money on the table. We're not servicing, we're not addressing the backlog of projects, right? And so you gotta find ways to spend that money, for what the town needs. So, but slowing down growth, right? Like, it feels like we're kind of cresting the hill here, right? And then so just kind of wonder, okay, where are we gonna kind of plateau, right? And what's kind of that's.
I think we can go into, I want to let Amanda keep going, but I think when we get to the tax rate analysis, we can have, there is some of that discussion and it'll come out. You asked for that plan, that kind of glide path, if you will, and that's what we have to show you what we came up with. But there's room for, your input on that. There's room to see what you're talking about. Where do we head? Where's that leveling out look like? And then again, keeping in mind what the practical idea, here's what we can do. And then again, we understand the tolerance and evaluation you all as elected officials have to look at it as well. So there's that.
And I just want to add, I think there's two separate fiscal issues getting conflated here. There's the capital spending, which is the fund balance portion of it, which is a set amount of money that sometimes we add to every year, sometimes we take away. We could always just not do capital projects, right? Like if you get too low, we just.
They're not suggesting that, right? It's like-
But no, I'm not either. I'm just saying like that's an option. Like if we do too many capital projects and we don't have money, we could just not do a lot of capital projects that year. Now, then there's the operating part, which I think is more related to the sustainability issue of, the town's expanding, you need to hire more people. Their salaries are going up, benefits you want to provide people are going up, insurance costs are going up. And what revenue is coming in to outweigh those or, offset those costs. So I think view them as two different things.
And they are completely.
Because we're never gonna use the fund balance to pay for operating costs like someone
Right,
said.
and that's the proper way of doing it, right? But conversely, the fund balance is funded through access on the operating side, right? And if the operating side is low, right, then there will not be any more money going into the funds. At some point, we're gonna run out of capital to do capital projects. Right, that's my concern over the longer term, right? And so that's kind of where I'm trying to get a gauge of where we are, right? And how much takeout out of the fund balance is acceptable because of, kind of sustained overperformance or coming in under budget, which kind of replenishes that fund.
And I'll say something out loud that I've been thinking for the past half an hour. I used to stress out all this a lot too every year. And I used to look at that number and go, oh my God, we're gonna transfer this many millions of dollars. And what happens every single year at the end of the fiscal year, it says, we planned on transferring 20 million. We ended up actually putting 5 million in the fund balance. And this happened 4 years in a row, like 5 of every time.
All right.
So we're very, very conservative. So every year we see this.
Thank you for entertaining my newbie questions then.
No, it's a good question, but to Sean's point, like the estimates are conservative. And I'm willing to bet, even though we're not gonna budget like this, I'm willing to bet at the end of the year, the fund balance turns out rosier than this picture, and next year it'll be another year out. But the fact of the matter is, we're at 43 now. Our policy is 25. The minimum is 8. No matter what happens this year, even if it doesn't turn out to be rosy, we're still not going to be close to our minimum. And we can adjust to go.
I think long-term, as far as the growth goes and like the tax base, the way I see it is that this kind of leveling off is the 2018 rezonings that were way down from the 2015 time, like by a lot. And since then, it's been a lot more non-residential, higher density oftentimes with the residential part. I think that will lead us to a better fiscal state actually in 3 or 4 years when that stuff gets built, personally.
Yeah.
Especially the non-residential part, which is has much lower service.
And I'm curious of that too. Stuff like Cash Corporate plus Apex Gateway plus like all the stuff together. Does the expected tax revenue of that, does that make a dent? Like, what does that do to our mix? Like, is that significant, or are we still like, well, that's 1% of what?
Feels like a lot of land.
It feels like it, but I don't know like the actual numbers of how meaningful that actually is going to be in 10 years. Verde has a lot of commercial area. Once that develops in 10 years or so, is that going to be meaningful, or is that just going to be a drop?
I think meaningful personally. I think at least 5 or 10% of.
I think we can repay. You just tell us. Like,
I think it depends on.
They just look up and say like, yeah.
Put a warehouse there, I think it's gonna be different than like a 5-story office building that generates more.
Well, the tax base is based on the land and the building and what's in the building, right? That's how.
That's right. Yeah,
Property
you
tax
got
works,
real
right?
land personal, even with and personal is on a depreciation schedule though, so that's always the thing that.
Okay.
Is there, they may invest 150 million, but if 50 million of that is equipment, that 50 million drops 2-3% every year until you get to a baseline. So then, yeah, it's not always, even that's not clean. We start at 150.
Well, do we have a tax, a residential and non-residential tax ratio that we project out? And do we have a number?
Like the last slide. You guys are, man.
Last slide.
So we do have, we'll
We're
get
like
we do have
10 years out.
It's not, this
It's not,
is
it's not
based
10
on,
years out. It's just based on where we currently are.
it's a
Okay.
comparison, but it's where we've been as well. So typically Apex has been an 80-20 split for years.
Yeah.
And we actually just
We
talked
just
about
had this conversation.
today about, understanding what the impact of gateway and cash would be. And then how much does it move the needle of that 80-20 to something in the 70s, getting resident, non-resident.
You make us wait till the end to find out the end.
Where is it?
We don't,
We're all looking.
The problem with that is we don't have the answer to that right now. But it's something that, again, we talked about today, I talked about with the budget team today, that the one that we want to start looking at. There's no magic number to what that ratio will be. Every community is different. And so I'll wait till we get to the end to talk about it a little bit more, but you'll see the ratio differences at the end. And you'll also see that because of other variables in it, it doesn't necessarily change what that cost per to the resident is. And so those will be discussions we'll have. This will be something moving forward. What does the next 2 to 3 years look like with these things? Because it's also still residential. And so.
All right.
Good discussion.
Let's move on.
Okay. So one thing that's always kind of asked is, what do we look like compared to our peers? So we have reached out to some of those peers and we do have answers for that. Of course, I'm sure you've heard Wake County is looking at doing a tax rate increase. Penny of that is tied to bonds. Fuquay, Garner, and Wake Forest are all proposing tax increases as well. So this would be a 3-cent tax increase for us. What we're proposing, again, 1 penny equals just over $1.2 million.
Your decision point though. So we have 3 cents. That's what's on the table. What we programmed in. So,
Well, I'll just start by saying, yeah, like, I haven't talked to everybody in town, but I've communicated the message of we have 3 cents, 2 cents roughly for public safety, and kind of parks. I think it's been fairly well received. I think it's a solid message. Just stick with it. And I think there is an opportunity to use some additional fund balance for capital projects. I'll get to later. I don't see a need to raise the tax rate to do that.
I think the use will actually reflect the resident influence, right? With public safety being number 1, transportation number 2, Parks and Rec number 3. I think this reflects that, or the mix reflects that.
We have consensus.
yeah, let's go. It's going to be a big lot of changes.
So it's kind of holding my breath a little bit, but
We still have other things to talk about, but yeah.
And no, actually, penny and a half, like that would be bad.
well, that's where we started. So in terms of solid waste collections, this is something we've spoken with you guys about as well. So there is a 2.5% cap on our contracts. This would be a pass-through, so that 2.5% increase that we're getting charged by the contractor, we'd be passing through to the customer. And then additionally, we've got the recycling processing fee, which they determine based on a calculation, based on what they estimate the tonnage cost would be to process the recycling. So that's increased. It's not on there. $1.34 per the contract. So that's a separate processing fee that's added to the recycling. So total, our residential customers would see about a 93-cent increase in solid waste charges. Questions or issues with this?
Are we moving to the Bend solid waste model and the associated cost or not, or higher or lower cost of that? But I know somebody talked about it. I guess one of the guys.
Not this budget.
Not in the budget. Okay. Would that increase or decrease the cost if we did the Bend, or is it kind of the same?
I mean, because some people have reduced costs, but they've reduced costs for doing multiple things, like going to every other week pickup instead of weekly pickup. So it's just according to how you model your program on what that costs.
Everybody's good with this?
You have the chart that shows the residential.
That's also later. So it's like I should just put all the slides up there and we can just pull up the different ones as you guys have had questions. So kind of to give you an idea of our expenditure summary. This gives you the breakdown of general government, public safety, economic and physical development, cultural and recreational, environmental protection. This kind of shows you where each part of that dollar kind of goes, I know that this has been something that's been well received by different citizens. They like to be able to see it and understand, okay, well, this, I get this. So we do include 4.675 million of fund balance. That includes the Salem Street Bicycle Connection. So that's going to be the start of that, to start the studies on that. Felton Grove High School cost share. This is one of 3 allocations.
Can I ask about that again? Is Holly Springs paying any money into that program?
Not that I'm aware of.
It's
Which one?
That's BS, by the way.
Felton Grove?
Yeah.
Not that I'm aware. I believe they have an intersection where they've got a light going up, but I think the
Okay.
developer's paying for that.
Well, if it happens the other way, we're not gonna pay, right? When they have to, when it's on their border. Anyway, I don't like how that went down personally in the
I
current
will-
situation.
Yeah, I will say, Carrie is doing something. I don't know.
Carrie is.
Yeah, Carrie is contributing to some of the road stuff that's going on down there. So,
Oh,
so I will say that. I don't know.
I was in their corporate limits.
In our corporate limits, but it's literally at the point where all 3 come together.
They're on one side of the road.
They're on the other side of the road. Holly Springs is on the other side, and it's in our corporate limits. There'll actually probably be more Holly Springs and Cary students than Apex students at the school.
So was it Holly Springs just decided not to contribute? Were they asked? I mean, what was it?
I think such,
they need to be asked at least, because they're like gonna be benefiting the most from this.
I was gonna say, I think statutorily we're responsible for all.
That's right, because it's in our.
I understand that, but we're partners with Holly Springs. Did we ask?
Wayne County Schools are coordinating this effort, it's my understanding. And there is signalization that is going to be done at 55 and main road as it comes out, that will allow the project team in Wayne County to move up and do some signalization at the school frontage, is my understanding.
The schools, they've been involved in discussions about what's going on.
Yeah, it is like.
They don't care. Schools, I mean, the school says, the law says towns pay for the roads now, so pay for the roads.
I know, but like their drivers are gonna benefit almost the most of anybody by a long shot.
I don't think, I think this is a dumb law because this is a rounding error in the balance of the cost of this project.
I agree with that too.
But it got pushed to us because that's what the law says. I think, yeah, I have thoughts about it. I don't like it.
Which is the members of council down the hall. Like, I'm just kidding. Well,
So Eva Perry Library, that's part of the agreement that we do have. So we'll be covering the cost that's for roof and air handler replacement. The Environmental Education Center
Alright.
is, we've got some money to go ahead and get started on some studying. So our hockey partnership with the Hurricanes, that contract, so that's coming through right now. So we'll have 50,000 out of this fiscal year and then 250 next fiscal year. $1 million contributing to Safe Routes to School, and then we'll have 1.5 that will come from the restricted fund balance that will transfer because we're setting up debt service as its own separate funds this year as well. And so we'll transfer that to cover debt service for the Mason Street Municipal Building.
I like the list of projects. I get frustrated when the list includes stuff like Environmental Education Center. I love it, but we know that's just the design of it, right? Yeah, and I like the build
And
stuff.
then
And it's red, by the way. I'm not sure you saw that.
Yeah, it's all that.
Yeah.
We'll get to it.
Yeah.
The directions, you actually have directions
Yeah.
before you build it.
Yeah, you can't build it until you design
Or
it.
do you? Like, you know what I'm talking about? It's square, like just. Or some,
It's like a design.
Yeah.
Just go out there and
Yeah,
start.
let's just
putting
lay
it in.
brick.
Just,
Okay, like,
just
design
draw it
foundation.
yourself and give it to the town and then they can build it, right?
And then design the first floor, then design the second floor, and then the roof is like 6 months later.
Yeah, I can see how that came along.
It'll probably be.
Do we need permits for that?
No, nothing could possibly go wrong. So part of that too is making sure that we're spacing things out so that we're not, otherwise what we're doing is we're setting up these capital project funds, which close, they don't close at the fiscal year, they close when the project closes. So what ends up happening is we transfer that money to a capital projects fund and we don't have the bandwidth to actually manage the project. So it just hangs out there, but it's restricted then, it's tied to a project. We can't use it to move forward another project that maybe we do, a small project that we do have the bandwidth to do as a.
When does that happen? Like, again, using the Environmental Education Center as an example, if you would spend $300K, we have a design, it costs $4 million. Do we at that point, in the next year's budget, have a $4 million transfer that goes to another fund?
It
Even though the
doesn't,
construction may take 18 months or 2 years.
It's on 25, 26.
So-
No.
And that doesn't necessarily mean that it's tied to that timeframe. That's up to council. It can come to council before then as a budget amendment, so we don't have to wait for like our annual budget to do that. We're trying to program it out, and that's one of the things that Sean will show is looking at how we're playing things out financially over the next 5 years and what basically revenue sources that's gonna take.
And for some of this, so for instance, like environment, some of the buildings, the way it's programmed in is we would actually probably expect to finance that. Right? So it could actually come sooner, just because it's just a matter of programming that debt into future programs. But it's just, we're trying to be more realistic about what we've seen, the time you take to do study and design.
All right, so this kind of gives you the breakdown in terms of the general fund, personnel, operating, capital, and debt service. One thing that you will see is this spike here for capital. And that's tied to like the 2.6 for Mason Street, 1.4 for street transit and greenway projects, 1.5 for facility renovations, which were PO carryovers, 1.2 in vehicle and equipment replacements that were on back order. And some, sort of other things. So it artificially inflates that capital for this fiscal year, but that's tied to a lot of other projects or PO carryovers.
So that might carry over to this year and then inflate this number. So next year, we're looking at the chart, will we see?
We hope not. So Antoine
Brackets.
has issued very clear direction about PO carryovers. All staff got an email about it. So I don't foresee,
Trying to look at that multi-year tracking.
PO enforcer over here.
I know, but it lands on the wall.
It's good.
Yeah.
so I'm gonna
The impact
say
of one.
it's unlikely it will be to the degree it was this year.
Yeah, this year was, the last 2 years have been have been higher than what historically had been. One, we had everything kind of with COVID and the market turned down. It slowed a lot of things that were already in motion. And so that's been part of it. And then between transition, everything was last year. It was a bit higher. So we definitely don't want it to be anywhere near what it was. So hopefully that's skewing that tail is a little bit shorter regardless. But then instead, what I was trying to do is the idea is we want next to no encumbrances on POs.
And how do you do that? Is that the fun thing you talked about?
We will likely have some PO carryovers, and that's just because it's either a project that's currently ongoing. So like we had renovation projects for HR and that Public Works Administration last year, and those got carried over because they were in progress. So we can't just say, okay, well, we're done this fiscal year, here's your check, because the project wasn't done. Or we have things that we're ordering that are in back order. Like we've got transformers. If we order a transformer right now for electric, we're looking at 18 to 24 months of lead time. We still have to have that PO and encumbrance because that's our guarantee to pay. So it'll continue to carry over. But in most cases, it's like, hey, if we haven't started this project, we're not carrying it over. If this is like a contract for services for the next fiscal year, we're not carrying it over. We can basically cut it and start with the new fiscal year budget. So I mean, there's different ways to kind of do that, but part of that's monitoring it as well. And Antoine is very much on top of what needs to happen there, and he has issued a calendar and staff has been notified. So we will still have some, but it will not be, I would be willing to put a paycheck on it. So.
I mean, that sounds great because I think this ties slightly to what Councilman Zuckerman was saying earlier, that it's hard to get apples to apples comparison year over year because of these POs and other issues.
That's right. So this is just showing that kind of that trend and how revenues and expenditures line up over time. So we're trying to get them, matched out and with the projections that we have.
You can see the large gap between the green and the yellow, especially over the last few years. That's my point. Saying that's where we kind of left some money on the table.
There's purposeful, the yellow flattening during the COVID year was purposeful.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I mean, there was some, you're correct on that. We had no idea what that, what
What it was going to look
it
like.
was really going to look like.
Yeah.
We went really far down. What I think we want to get to though is when we come to and we get the actuals, right? So to what Mr. Happy Smith was asked about is instead of waiting a whole nother year, when we come back, hey, here's what the actuals were. So I think we can come to you soon on that. That's some of the policy pieces we want to talk about that I mentioned. Okay, hey, normally we'll be doing you'll be getting an audit report around mid-year of our fiscal year. At that point is a good time to say either we have a policy in place of where some of that money goes, or hey, here's this project now. We kind of, it was last four, it was last four in or first four out, whichever you want to call it. You can do this now. Go ahead and do it instead of, okay, now let's go to the next year. That's where we can kind of close some of that gap.
Or just even like 6 months, right? Because we can put it in this budget if we want to do it, right? So like, why is it getting that much?
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying where we get to, like Katie just mentioned. We could come to you and say, look, we can go ahead and do a budget now and do it instead of, oh, we'll program it into the next cycle. And we can speed some of those things up to do.
We don't have to follow the budget calendar for the priorities that council establishes. What we can do is when the audit is done, I mean, that's our confirmed number. It's, we can get pretty close, but I mean, it's confirmed with the audit. So then that's what we're saying, be added back to fund balance. So at that point in time, if you guys say this is a priority, or, environmental education center is a priority. So I'm still paying for that. We want to allocate this, additional fund balance to go ahead and cover that project, or, we want to look at, putting this into capital reserves so that we can fund this $30 million project that we've got pushed out on the horizon to go ahead and start putting money towards what that would take. So, and a lot of the stuff will be, debt financing and stuff too, but we want to make sure that we're being cautious in terms of how the debt impacts the tax rate as well. Because we are basically, when we do those bonds and we do different debt service, I mean, we don't have to write a $4 million check necessarily out of our bank account, but we do have to make payments on that. We want to make sure that we're cautious of the impact.
I would argue this is better policy wise, because that if you do mid-year, it's a yes or no to the project. This is like yes or no, and look at all the things we're comparing to each other. So I kind of like having this comparison thing personally, like we're evaluating in the whole context of everything when during the normal budget way. That's my preference. I like things getting done faster, but like I like the context also.
So one thing that we did include in this presentation this year, which is new, and I know you guys enjoyed this at the retreat, was the citizen budget priority survey result. So kind of showing what our citizens had indicated as their priorities and the things that were most important to them. And like Mr. Zegerman said earlier, cultural and recreation, public safety, and transportation infrastructure were the top kind of 3 areas that the public responded were they're most important to them. So what we did is we kind of broke this down to show the dollar amount and percentage that we've allocated. I wasn't even touching it, sorry. That we've allocated to completely new budget items in each one of those categories. And then overall, in terms of the operating budget, what we've allocated towards each one of kind of those categories. So, we could see that we're kind of being responsive to what the public has said that they would like to see as well.
75.2 and not the total because we didn't include like finance and budget office. That's general government's not.
I wasn't sure where to categorize legal, if it was like transportation and infrastructure or maybe vibrant downtown.
Anyway, we left those out, so then just it's like skew.
It's a good story. We're putting our money where the residents are telling us where they would like to see it done.
So this is special events. So this is not all of our special events. Obviously, we've got like Earth Fest and 4th of July and things like that. But these are some of our different cultural special events. So we're adding some different special events that will be coordinated through Parks and Recreation and our DEI team. So that's 9 that were budgeted under administration for Parks, Recreation, and Cultural Resources. So the event average is about $3,500 per event. Katie, did you want to?
So initially, the original budget was for 5,000 per event. When we had to go back and make adjustments to the budget, recommendation is 30.
That's an average. Some are
That's an
higher,
average.
some are higher, some are lower, depending on talking with staff that they felt was what they needed for the.
Some of the events will come in lower and some will come in higher. So it's just kind of averaged out.
And this is independent of the cost of public safety, like the officer
Right.
tests.
Correct. So this is just like the programming that they do for the specific events. Any questions?
So kind of going back to a previous work session around the special events policy. If it's a town event,
These are for the town.
right? Is 3,500 the limit, or can the event organizer seek sponsorship from external parties?
So Antoine, do you want to respond to the sponsorship question now? Can you talk about the policy on that?
We currently do not have a true sponsorship policy. It's something that we discussed. It's needed. It's something that I've had in our organization. As people want to give, we're glad to take money to help us to further what we can do as an organization. That is something that is on the list to work, but it will come before that. At some point, I don't know the time frame of something right now.
So how is it typically done? Because I think statutorily, does the town have to vote to accept a donation? Or I think, can't we designate someone like you or you to accept checks on our behalf or as an individual? So we vote to adopt a policy to designate an individual to accept donations.
So I think for events, what it sounds like, and this, and you'll get an update on this in the responses coming about an event. What it sounds like has happened in the past is it's not been done under a policy. And so it's been inconsistent. And so we probably have accepted some checks prior to me getting here that were not accepted appropriately. And so that's why Antoine is looking at a special sponsorship policy.
What's the timing of that? Like, do we think we're gonna see some benefit of that for events later this year? Because, you know, $3,500 is not a whole lot to work with for programming, right? And so there's plenty of parties that would like to sponsor some of these events, but right now they're kind of, you know, it's kind of almost like a hard no, right? So what's kind of the timing that you think of the policy being available?
In the next 6 to 8 months, I would say probably by the end of this calendar year. We should have at least a draft or something before that.
Okay. Misha, did you have anything?
That's okay.
Okay.
Now, if someone donates to us, do they get a tax break like if they had donated to a 501c3? Or is it from the? Taxes? To ourselves?
But the statement.
Oh, I know. I think that speaks to, like the model that we have, like for Peak Fest, where we have, a festival commission, which is not only an independent organization, but they're a 501c3, if you donate to them, you get a tax break, easier to fundraise that way.
Yeah, so is that a better model for us, or because there's two ways, like, so it sounds like we can address that through a sponsorship policy, or what you just described, like it's
Yeah.
basically a separate organization.
I think there has to be certain critical mass, because setting up and administering a 501c3 is also complicated too, so that's everyone can do it. So once I think it gets to a certain size and a certain amount of money involved, then maybe it makes sense to.
Or they could use it this way.
All right, so one thing that you guys have, I believe most of you have seen at this point has been the personnel. So we're looking at 28 position additions this fiscal year. Also driving increased personnel costs are the increase in retirement rates, insurance increases, and then looking at adjustments to compensation, which would be a 2% market rate increase, 4% merit, and a $1,200 peak lifestyle reimbursement, which is a new program that was proposed this fiscal year. So this kind of shows you the general fund budget and then the total budget, which goes across the utility funds as well. So you're able to see the full impact.
What's the peak lifestyle reimbursement?
So this is a program that was proposed by our HR team. It would be $1,200 for different wellness type events or activities and purchases.
Two
Uh,
memberships or something like that.
Yes.
Okay.
We started with Carrie. I will tell you, I met with a couple of other managers. They're not happy that we're doing this.
So this gives you the, so this is the full-time equivalent count, because we are looking at 3 part-time positions. So those aren't counted as a full, it would be their hours. So we would add 24 positions to the general funds, 2 electric, 1 water sewer, and 1 stormwater. And then that would get our authorized position count up to 637. This is a list of the positions that were included. So I don't know that I need to go through these. I feel like I've been through these with most of you already, but if you want me to, I will.
Well,
All right. The expenditures, this is just a highlight of the capital, for vehicles and equipment for the general funds. You can see the department for the vehicle replacements on the left, totaling, $1.7 million. So those are all vehicles that have, met our policy, and then also, analysis for replacement. I went ahead and added fire engine because I know everybody sees the E1 at 900,000 and they're like, wait, what's that? So that's been delineated as a fire engine, moving forward. We have vehicle additions. A lot of those additions, are tied to, new positions, new personnel that we're adding. And then equipment, obviously, is mostly operating.
How many of these new vehicles will be EVs?
Most of them. So we've got analysis that, my team is working on. So, we're identifying the different types, and then depending on when the purchase, we can actually purchase or receive. So we have a few different things I know, we've looked at and proposed. There's some for trucks that we're not able to do because the towing capacity, because we need to tow, basically kills the battery, and or there's not a good option, but we are looking at either being EV or a hybrid vehicle.
yeah.
So we'll be, I don't know if you've got a receive date, Sean, but we've got we have a couple, pool vehicles that are coming in with as EV as well. So surprisingly, a Mach-E is cheaper than a Kia, in case you were wondering.
But the police.
We're gonna need to explain that to people.
That's what we said. We said we're gonna put like a QR code on stuff so they can scan it and see. Feel like the cost comparison breakdown, but yes, it's actually about 5,000 cheaper. The Mach-E is 5,000 cheaper than a Kia.
Okay, so how many exactly? You said most of them, like over half?
So when we get into the new fiscal year, it depends on the orders. It's gonna depend on whether or not we'll bill for order, because they'll open those orders in July. And so we'll be competing against everybody else for a limited amount of cars.
In terms of infrastructure though, I also concerned about want to be all EV in the future at some point, whether it's, next year, a few years from now. We need to have the charging stations placed at Public Works and the police department everywhere to support them. I didn't see a ton of money in the budget to put charging stations at our facility. They thought 70K or something.
So right now we're doing analysis on the type of charging station that we're gonna move to for standard. Because the ones that we were using have kind of got obsolete and are no longer available, but we also want the option to be able to do load management on them in response to some of the issues we're having with electric. So we're looking at doing the recommendation for that. And then my team is working on doing an analysis of projecting out replacements over time. And then basically what department or location those vehicles are tied to, so that we know where to position our infrastructure over the next 5 years based on the replacement schedule. Because we do have some vehicle additions, but a lot of it will be tied to vehicle replacements for replacing with. So we're trying to map that out. And then they are also preparing for a grant that they are applying for this month. At the end of this month.
Yeah.
With the EPA? EPA grant?
The EPA grants.
The climate reduction one? The one with
Yeah, I think so.
the Raleigh MSA is a cooperative thing?
This is the federal.
This is what?
This is the federal government, so it's not tied to the MSA, it's more, it's a DOT program that
Okay.
federal government.
I know there's like a Raleigh MSA one that EPA is doing as well.
Well, yeah, this one's separate. It's we're tied to like there's a community grant program that they have. It's-
Okay,
it's-
maybe we can do both. There's about to be a lot of money coming to this exact thing from the EPA, so.
I would like all that money.
Yeah, so I hope we're taking part in those grants, the
Ask
one
for that money.
Raleigh.
So, well, that's what we're doing now. So my team is working to get some different things together so that we're prepared to apply for those grants and be able to show, you know, what our plan is. And it's based kind of on data and some long range planning as well. And then with new facility development, like we'll have Mason Street, we'll have the infrastructure already set up so we can go ahead and install.
Thanks. Sounds like you guys are really on top of it.
Can I ask a question about the townwide chemical replacement?
Yeah.
With regard to maybe a more question for our electric power stations security, have we enhanced that at all just to make sure that we're monitoring and any type of potential threats?
We don't have permanent cameras.
Considering several stations were shot at, might not be a bad idea.
It does raise concern for me, so I didn't know if that was, we had that in plans.
So this is part of a organizational plan. So they're upgrading and adding to. So part of that too is the server. This includes part of the server storage. But I can ask when the electric substation specifically, when they're looking at doing that. Sorry, made a note. Always ahead of me. For capital improvements, we'll continue the annual pavement management contracts, miscellaneous road and sidewalk improvements. This is an annual allocation we started a long time ago. The Felton Grove, that's the fund balance. Go Apex transit improvements, that's 100,000. We're looking at a grant match on that. Justice Heights Street Extension, Safe Routes to School, the bicycle connection, Tingen Road pedestrian bridge, which the 500,000 is the grant that we're getting from the community funding. Freeway connections, hockey partnership, Bravo Education Center, West Street Park improvements. This is actually going to be ARPA funds. We're using the ARPA funds transfer for this one. And then Tunstall House and Eva Perry Library improvements. So believe Daniel, we have some money in that fund currently. I think the latest estimate from Daniel was 2.1. 2.1.
For Tunstall's that much.
2.3.
2.3.
It's brutal.
Maybe it'll get cheaper next year. I want to ask about Justice Heights Street Extension. What's the timeline for that project if we approve this budget? That's kind of exciting too. It's good to do it.
Okay.
Which project could here?
Justice Heights.
We can always follow up.
Sure.
Hey, communicating with them, I'm still worried about people being surprised by the amount of traffic that's going to go through that neighborhood.
Mayor said that someone knocked on their doors. Talked to them.
Yes, I really think communicating the timeline and everything would be really important for them and expectations, for real. They're about to be surprised. I'm
Well,
afraid.
I did explain that to them. And they still want the connection.
I would too, but I just need to make sure that they know what to expect.
Yeah, the budget for fiscal year 24, any budget. So as far as the timeline of the project, I have to talk to the team about where it's at. You know, where the party signs.
We can follow up and let you know.
For this $750K for the design. And
It's already designed.
Oh,
We already budgeted for design. We're trying to move forward with construction.
that's pretty cheap. I'd be
Yeah,
surprised.
It's not a huge extension. Question will now be, is it the right amount? The question now will be, is it the right amount?
They're gonna keep that.
So that's,
Okay, good. I
that's
just want
kind
to
of
make sure.
where
I agree.
we could end up with a different estimate. Come back to.
So capital reserve funds, transportation capital reserve, we're projecting 1.4 for motor vehicle tax, and we're committing that 1.4 to pavement management and annual miscellaneous road improvements, and then 750 to Justice Heights extension. The Recreation Capital Reserve Fund, we've got a projection of 1.3 million from recreation subdivision fees, and we are not planning an allocation for the Recreation Capital Reserve. Affordable Housing Fund, the transfer, so this would be a reduction from the 1.5 cents to 1 cent, which is the original intention of council, or original direction of council was to put at least 1 penny towards affordable housing annually. This was an effort to balance the budget previously. We do have 3 million committed in ARPA funds that will be transferred over to this. We don't have any current pending projects or commitments outside of what's already been committed for the Broad Stream Walk projects.
So whose call was this to go down, to decrease? I didn't hear about it till for the budget, so I'm not sure if it was a committee or not.
That was mine.
It was yours?
Finance committee.
But it was part of our recommendation.
It was part of the recommendation.
Within the finance committee.
Okay.
Originally when I brought the budget to Finance Committee, we still had a $2.9 million gap.
That was a way of getting that gap closed. So that's something that they,
And the mitigating factors here are there is a 3 million transfer from ARPA, and there's actually nothing to spend the money on currently.
So we have $4.2 million to play with in this area. Am I reading it correctly?
250 will come out for the housing rehabilitation.
Housing, 250,000 we do is the housing rehab program, but yes.
So we have 4 million basically waiting for.
Roughly, yeah.
Project.
And we could,
How we had
the initial idea is we could save up and maybe get a good fund balance and purchase some land.
It's not that our
Yes,
loan grant, our grant gap funding was kind of wiping out all that every year, at least the last couple of
Well,
years.
we've already allocated that amount out. So we've already accounted for all those so far. So this next coming year, you have not made a commitment for this upcoming year on what's in that fund so far. So, yeah, there's only 2 projects you've made commitments. Well, actually you made 3, but one was really small. That was just a small habitat. That was very small, like 100,000. That's been taken care of. Broadstone commitments has been made and already accounted for. The other one is Abbey Spring. And so they've all been accounted for already. So we're moving into another year where you haven't had any request or commitment on those funds yet. Because so it's basically, it'll be in that reserve for it. And then to Mr. Happy's point, the ARPA money y'all did set aside, are you kind of earmarked for land purchase for affordable housing?
We have to do that before 25, 26.
That's correct, for 26. That study is getting ready to start. Like we are finalizing the contract with Development Finance Initiative from the school government. We're working on that. Mitra just had to leave, but she's finalizing that. I believe you've been working on that, right? Well, I think you've seen the DFI.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we're working on getting that one finalized, and that is that study to kind of say, this is the property. So we should meet that timeline to get that done.
Is that 4 million?
Yeah, I mean, there's somewhere between 3 and 4.
Is it possible, sorry, it's possible if that land purchase might be a joint, like affordable housing and government use type thing? Is it meant to be only for affordable housing?
That's up to you.
Okay.
You earmark the ARPA money for, as long as it's appropriate, as long as it's an appropriate use of the ARPA funds, which government use would be, you can use it for that. But that's what you can want to do. But you have the ability to modify what those funds can be used for, as long as they fit in that overall parameters for us.
It's right kind of land. We could do both. Yeah.
We kind of said it tongue in cheek when we're looking at it, DOT design around 65 Technology Drive and Main Street there. Like that's a spot on the land that's kind of unutilized right now. Like right on Main Street.
By Meridia, by 540.
Yeah, probably across from Meridia.
Yeah.
I mean, there's the neighborhood Miramont and Pemberley, the 2 neighborhoods there.
I think that ship might have sailed. Like once DOT does their final design, like I'm not sure if they would have an opportunity to go back and say, I actually want this connector road here. I mean, I don't know. I guess you could do it later as like a regular CIP is just trying to, I don't know where I land, but.
But if you fire the lens, basically love with a connector and build an apartment, flow with affordable housing apartments there, right? And just,
That's a thing we can do. I don't know if that's, I don't think DOT committed to doing that, my understanding. And we don't have anything on our CIP that would have us doing it. So.
Any more discussion on that? So this comes to fund balance. So current unassigned available fund balance, 43.7. So our current policy requires at least 25 discussions that you guys have had in the past. That is not a requirement. You can always amend that policy. It is not like a statutory requirement. That's a policy, the decision that's made by you all. And then you can see again what we're comfortable, are we comfortable using this amount and what it's allocated for. I'll turn it over to Sean.
I know for the sake of time, we'll try and push through this, but this is the discussion point that you'll ask for. As far as where do we get to? How do we push capital spending back up to kind of a historical pattern of 12%? In making this decision, working with the budget staff as we look at what the projects were in the CIP, trying to be a little more realistic about what's there, right? I mean, so you point out there's $140 million and on those projects, you can't do all of that. And it's not reasonable to just throw all of it within the 5-year scope and say, okay, let's try and get, when it's just not going to happen. So to get to the 12% though, the tax rates at the top are what you programmed in and try to keep it the CIP on a reasonable projects, trying to really kind of almost level them, but to get back to 12%. You can see, so by year 3 on CIP, by 25, 26, we could be back to the 12%. Yeah, it drops down a little bit, but on average, just puts it about by 12% by the time it's up. Again, this is flexible. We've done what we went with. See, 44% this year. 42, the reason it's 42 is because our projection is that with reval, the revenue neutral rate will be about 40.5 cents. So that's a 1.5 cent increase, effective increase next year. Then it's basically another 1.5, it's 1.6, but 1.5 for the next year. That actually corresponds with the intended sale of the transportation bonds, the second sale of that. And then you got another 1.5 the next year, and we kept flat for those 2 years. So what we looked at was really 1.5 cent increase for 3 straight years. That would get you to, that was 1.5 based off that's a little bit of a subjective call on our part, trying to, what might be what's tolerable for you, what's tolerable for the community. But to get us there, we showed you the plan. Now, with what we still kept in the CIP, yes, there is still a gap. You can see that $3 million gap. So I showed you what the gap was and what you would need to go to even more if you wanted to get it, and then what that tax rate would be if you did all those projects that are on the CIP in the 5-year gap, what the tax rate would need to be, and then what that would mean in terms of your percentage. You see, it puts us well above the 12% if you do all those. But what those top percentages represent is basically you would do everything except that gap, right? So just back out the projects that are on that create that gap and do that. This was the plan we recommended. Then the tax rate can be up, down. I want to kind of show you what a plan could look like to get there. Of course, you can always set the tax rate for 1 year. Can't do future tax rates, but this would be, again, the plan. Something to show where we are headed, what we think could be done, and then that's up to you beyond that. Just each one annually as you see fit, up or down. One more thing, I forgot something to mention, but thank you. Actually, you go to the next slide. To do this, there were significant projects that had to be pushed out. Read the CIP analysis. I wrote this in there. Just couldn't have that plan and then keep $12 million, $10, $12 million projects on that 5-year plan. So these plans were ones, $82 million worth that I just showed you, like why we couldn't keep it on the plan. This is $82 million that was originally kind of captured in that 5-year period that we're like, you can't do everything, right? $82 million, that's not going to increase the tax rate, but we cover that. Now, that said, you're not going to pay for all that cash, you're going to finance some of this. What this does, what this means, does not mean we're not doing these projects, does not mean that we're not seeking out alternative methods, but that's where we're headed. We're trying to figure out other ways to bring this back to you in the future where maybe we can do these projects. Some of these projects are going to have to be beyond this 5-year scope and figure out what we can. Some of them we know are high priority. For instance, Pleasant Park is up trying to finish that out. But that escalation of that cost has just been rapid, a lot more than we foresaw. I think. Even the money that we're supposed to get from the county is only a drop. It's a little over 10% of that. So there's still a lot to do. What we're going to look at is other financing methods that they're other than bonds, and figure out and understand what the impact of that debt service would be on the capacity, debt tolerance, and then come back to you about, okay, hey, there's a way to possibly do these projects that don't involve the bonds, but we would have to finance. We don't have $12 million in cash. So, well, we do, but then you're not going to have anything else, right? And so that's the other balance, the other juggling act you have with fund balance, right? Again, if you have 17 spends, there's $82 million projects right there, which you know. So financing is an option. We just have to we need a little more time to understand what the implications of that are for our financial condition, and we will bring that back to you. So again, I don't want you to think that we're just, nope, these aren't happening. We are trying to figure out ways to make them happen. We still have more time to assess it, but at the same time, they did have to kind of move off to get to a reasonable, what we expect to be a reasonable plan to get back to building stuff, with that historical 12%.
So even if we did decide to add a penny or two to the tax rate at this point in time, do we have capacity staff-wise to do any of these things?
It depends on the project. Depends on,
You do the ones that are closer to this year. That'd be the ones we were discussing, not these in the future ones, right?
Discussing.
Yeah, I'm saying, yeah, but say, in theory, you're moving the ones in this column over hypothetically, not these, right?
So what I would say is, it would be tough. It depends on the department and where you go. So, I would tell you that transportation is stretched thin. They have a lot of projects coming up. They have a whole projects budget that we're trying to get to and trying to work on. Not to mention just the annual work they have to do. Have the people that they're desperately pushing. That's a big project. So transportation would be hard pressed to, if you start adding money for projects, you have to give them a little bit of time. But so the capacity wise. Recreation depends on the project. Facility wise, like with like Pleasant Park, even doing the studies on some of the, like maybe the facilities, it'd be a push, but I think we could manage that. Craig's probably watching right now. Grimace, but I think we could do it. The greenways, on the other hand, as much as everybody likes those, it takes a lot of time and effort in getting those. There's a lot of properties usually involved, like when it's ours. I don't know that we have the capacity right now to handle more than what we're trying to add already. Because the Middle Creek is just starting, just to prove that. We have the Beaver Creek, first phase of Beaver Creek comes soon. We're getting pretty close to getting that rebid out. So it's Angela and Tyler. And so that's kind of, and it's not just those are our projects, but they are also the ones that monitor, supervise all the greenways that the developments are putting in as well to make sure that they're meeting standards. So that would be a little more stressed. So maybe some of the recreation, transportation has a little more vested, I think, the greenway side of things, but they would still need help. That said, there are ways to work through that with consultants and engineers, but you're at their mercy in terms of one should cost more, and sometimes that's shorter, sometimes it's not. So the experience over the last couple of years has been, it's taken a long time for engineers I mean, they've got a lot of work too. So, but yes, good question on what the cost is. Sometimes it doesn't even matter. You put the money there. And we run into that. We put money in, thought we had a good project, and then, hey, we finally get a bid, and now all of a sudden it's, the Middle Creek Creamery is a great example. We've been working on it. It's not like the easements and everything. We had design and everything ready to go. And then you come and we try and factor in escalation, but escalation has just been, out the window the last couple of years. And so we finally got to it, and here we are, 2 million short, and that was more of a capacity issue than anything else, just in trying to get that time.
So on that point though, right, so you mentioned transportation being stressed in, so, we're looking at the CFP plan here. Going from $6 million projects next year, 10 million, 24, 25, 35 million, 25, 26. So if we feel that that is stretched for $6 million worth of projects, do we reasonably believe that it can handle $55 million of projects 2 years from now?
In some ways, it depends on the project. So real quick, I'll do a quick breakdown on what you're looking at on there. 4.5 of that downtown. Now, transportation's involved in that, but there's some other engineers in that. 5 million of that on that one is the pavement management backlog. That's kind of just an add-on. It's something we already do, so it would just be additional funds to like our annual paving that we already do. So it just gives them more. I think we'd be okay managing that one. It doesn't necessarily take more people. It's a bigger project. Some of it we're working on design on a, but to your point, Mr. Chairman, yes, there would be some of that. That would be a challenge for them. I'm trying to look at a few of these things on here.
And I guess by extension, how did we select this list of projects with the full out of this one list, right? Big pictures worth of capital projects.
Council priorities. Some of these did not, they weren't your higher priorities in the Davis Drive and Salem. That wasn't, when we did the spec. The ones that were the higher priorities that were pushed were the Pleasant Park, Beaver Creek Greenway Extension, the I think Production Drive, which is actually a smaller one. So those were some of the higher ones off that were priorities that got pushed out. But the Davis Drive Salem Church Road realignment was not a high priority. I mean, ranked it, but it was, order wise, it wasn't necessarily, it wasn't one of the higher ones. Same thing with the townwide traffic signal. It kind of was middle of the road, right? So it was kind of pushed out. Then you get like the Eastway Southeast connector. We're just not even close to. We're just not there. Capacity wise, timing wise, the sensitivity of that project. I mean, we're just not there, and we're probably not there in 5 years. So that was kind of like.
Where's the Eastway Bridge on the CIP?
It's not on the CIP because it's already been.
Because it's already.
Yeah, it's already been accounted for. And, that I'll be quiet now. Thoughts on the plan? What do you want to see? Feel it's reasonable? You feel it's doable? Does it mean? I know consensus was asking for it, but we're happy you had a specific, you kind of made that initial motion on it. Guidance you want to provide us? What we'll look at.
May I ask a favor? And this may be something that you can just kind of go back through the out years to figure out, but it would be great just for us to be able to tell the story of this, to have like the cost at inception. I mean, I know this is essentially
Like
current.
originally budgeted.
Yeah,
for.
because I think it'll be important for us to be able to explain and help within our analysis to show like, Davis Drive, Salem Street, 7 million down. 4 years ago it was only 3 million, notionally, that just talking that out.
That's when we repeatedly get asked about the Peakway Bridge. We've already done this. Why are you asking for more money?
Right.
It's like-
It just helps us tell the story. Exactly. Because that's what, we hear it all the time on that.
Pleasant Point of the Bridge.
Pleasant Point and things like that. It's just to kind of help us explain, because I know that when we talk about it internally, we're factoring in things like cost of increase of manpower, cost of increase of materials, cost, things like that. But being able to kind of help explain that will help us as we're explaining to folks, well, this project is happening, but we are asking for more money because X, and that way we can just kind of show that delta.
I would argue that this list doesn't matter that much because what really matters is this year. I mean, if this is year 5 versus future. I mean, things change, you know, I would argue. So like, I would spend a lot of time worrying about this. personally.
Well, we get to reprioritize those every single
Yeah.
year, right?
Yeah.
I would agree, but you have stuff that's in progress like Pleasant Park. I mean, fully built out, people have questions. They already asked me questions about it. So I think there's specific ones that I would like to see.
Right, and I mean, in terms of just, I mean, that's why I say it's like, it's just, maybe it's just a data pull from the slides from last year, or the year before last, to be able to help answer questions, but I think that's just, we've got to be much better at telling the story of why, you know, why this is, why we're seeing certain things get pushed, certain things get approved, certain things are in the pipeline, and this just helps us tell the story.
So is this the time of the meeting where we talk about the CFP altogether, or do you specifically want feedback on this plan? There's other slides. Where
No, that's, I mean, this is fine. I mean, this is kind of, we're at the, come to the end of the general fund side. Hopefully we have utilities split. So if you want to talk about CFP, I mean, this is kind of what's included on it. It's good times in.
But to Brett's point, you know, I agree that like there's the overall plan. And I, you know, what matters most is what we're authorizing for this fiscal year. We're gonna go through this reprioritization exercise again next year and the year after, and every year we'll adjust and move stuff back. If you want to have, you know, some fun, go back and look at our CFPs from a couple of years ago and see where some of these projects landed, how they got reprioritized. Stuff tends to, that being said, stuff tends to get pushed back more than forward. But what's important overall, like you know, the plan that you presented, I like it. I agree. Like, that's what I asked for, is like, what do we need to do to get ourselves up to our typical amount of spending, so we're not constantly pushing back projects forever. In terms of this list, I think, aren't there some opportunities here to find some funding that might fall out of the sky for stuff like the townwide traffic signal system? There's grants we can get for that stuff.
Right, and so we're not ruling those out. I mean, we just don't have those confirmed, and so we struggle to put those on the CIP and identify, hey, here's grant funding on it, because we don't believe that gives you a realistic picture then of what could potentially happen. That's how you get stuff pushed out even further again, because, hey, we had it on there, we thought we were going to get a $5 million grant for a $6 million project. Oh, well, it's actually an $8 million project now, we got a $1 million grant. I mean, right. And so, but that's to my comments earlier, we are exploring, we're not giving up on things. It's just, we need more time to assess what is really, what are other methods to get them taken care of. Yeah. So the point on Pleasant Park, I mean, Pleasant Park was the highest prioritized one. Which we've been talking about that. We've known it's coming, but we've gone from ball fields, this complex that was $3.5 to $4 million, then it was $6 million, then it was $8 million, and now it's $12.3 million. And we just don't have that chunk of cash to throw at it, even with a little bit of help from some of our partners. However, we are looking at, talking with Antoine and Amanda, we are going to look at, okay, well, what's another method? What's another financing method of maybe making this happen? We've kept things pretty simplistic, and we've been able to, just between growth, you have cash, or we've been able to keep it simplistic on how we've done our financing, right? We may have to get a little more creative now. So that just takes a little more analysis and to make sure that we're doing it right and not overextending ourselves, making sure we're keeping ourselves financially sound. That's what we're looking at right now. We've actually already had 2 calls, I think, right, Antoine, with our financial advisor, like as far as how we may structure some things and look at a few options on, okay, we can maybe finance 12.3 million, well, minus the grant.
The GEO bond?
No bond. We're looking for alternatives other than bond.
What's the alternative to a bond?
You want to speak to alternatives?
Obligation bond, installments, yeah.
Yeah, so a different kind of bond.
Different,
not
yeah.
necessarily GEO bond,
Right.
but
It's not ones that we're going to have to wait to have a referendum go back to. But at the same time, we want to make sure that when you do the GEO bond, the voters are basically saying, we're okay with this tax increase on this, right? I mean, that's the referendum piece. If we don't do the GEO bond, you're still taking on debt and you still got to pay for it. So the council has to decide, you're okay with the tax increase on it, or we got to figure out how we're absorbing it into the budget. That's the part we have to have the analysis on. We want to make sure you're comfortable with it, because that's your tolerance level, right? So, hey, we finance this. Do you want to add a penny? You want to figure out how to absorb it, which means you may have to have something else, but it gets this project done. That's what we're having.
So realistically, like, for some of these projects, like, again, I go back to the townwide traffic signal system, money might fall out of the sky at some point.
Potentially.
For other ones that are like 8 figures or more, like, that's gonna be a bond of some kind.
It's likely, like, some of the, and there's projects, not all these, there are projects that were already in future years, right, that we're just kind of kidding out there, right? Jessica and I had this talk, we know that there's going to be another bond, and, you know, in the future, you know, within somewhere in that 5 to 10 year window, you're going to council, this council, whoever's on council, are going to have to do another bond for some of these transportation projects. I mean, you're likely not doing the next Peakway connector if that happens without a bond. You're not going to do Wimberley Road or Olive Farm Park areas, whatever they call it, without a bond, because those are going to be $50 million parks minimum each. You're
Oh, it
going
brings in $100 million bond.
I mean, you've got big ones. And so we're trying to make sure whatever we do now, though, remember this, anything debt is a long-term impact. That's what we're trying to look at. If we come back to you and say, hey, we want to do a limited obligation bond or installment purchase, whatever it may be, here's your debt impact. What does that mean in terms of the bond in the future? I mean, that's how you structure
Ratios and where we can float another bond. Okay. In terms of Pleasant Park, if there is gonna be a gap of time between when we next float a bond and actually construct it as initially envisioned, what can we do to program that space in the interim couple years? So it's not just a dirt field. Have we thought about, I mean, for baseball diamonds, we're gonna go with that. Like, we have a $12.5 million option to build a bunch of really nice fields of baseball diamonds. Get something out there with some paint, put a fence up, for things, and like make something usable in the interim, like utilize the space. Like, I joke a little bit, but I'm kind of not joking. Like, is there a $250,000 option to go build some fields there?
So the other side of it, so it's one, we're looking at, from budget and finance staff, we're looking at, okay, 12.3 is the estimate you've been given. We're trying to figure out, are there financial options for taking care of it? The other side of it is on the practical side of it is Craig and his team are evaluating, okay, look, is there something that needs to be done to rescale this? Is there something else that needs to be done to phase this? Is there another use? And even if there's not, to your point, what's that interim look like? Some of that will be determined by the time. Like if Antoine and I work with our financial advisor and we come back and we're like, oh, we come to you and say, we can start this within a year, you're probably not going to bother trying to plug something in.
Yeah.
If it's 3-4 years, you may be trying to figure something plugged in. And so then they're trying to figure that out. So that one's a little more fluid. The recreation staff are working to figure out. And then from a purely technical construction standpoint, I'd have to leave that to Daniel and his team out because I don't know, like, safety wise and everything else, what it looks like out there. But we realize it does right now, when it's finished, the mayor's point, you're going to have everything else done on this park. And you're going to have a pit right there at the opening. So
Yeah, that's what I'm
it'll at
saying.
least be grassed over. So you'll at least have an open area space.
But even if, I mean,
So-
a field of grass is great, but if we could put up like.
Yeah, it's not gonna be a
some
big mud.
pavilions and like some benches and people can use the space just. to
It's
hang
not
out.
going to be a mud hole. At the worst, it'll be a common green.
Marty,
What
do you
about-
have something to add?
I was gonna say, some people ask, why don't we go back to natural fields? And that's not the savings that you think. The design was based around these being artificial fields, and therefore everything about the grade, everything about that site, all ties to that. So if you go away from that, you're having to do a lot of money on grading and re-landscaping. And then you have stormwater issues that become a different issue when you change that. So we're kind of down that road of where we want to go. It's just now with cost escalations and whatnot, we've just got to get to a point where we can build the rest of the park. Now, there may be a way to phase it with the final product, and we can look into that. And there's other ways that we may be able to save some money on some of the shelters and like looking at the materials and type of shelters that we have. Them, you still have the same function, but it may not be the same material.
We considered like community donations or financial sponsorships from businesses locally and stuff like that to build.
Partnerships.
So, yeah, we had looked at partnerships. We potentially had some earlier on that kind of fell through. One of the things that came along with this project that's still somewhat in the works, Craig and his team are working on, there is a catalog. They've been trying to develop a catalog kind of for sponsorships and things. And just had trouble like kind of working through it and getting it together. At this point, yeah, I mean, you can still raise sponsorships for small things in the park that could help offset some of this. But kind of done everything except the baseball field at this point, kind of targeting that group. But Craig has actually already reached out to potential partners and groups for that. And we're waiting to hear back on some of what they're willing to do. Well, one several months ago that kind of came through the economic development side, college baseball, Fame was looking, but they wanted us to redesign everything and then we contributed. And it was like, well, that's not really a partnership. So, or they did, but it was a very small, it wasn't what the cost of saying. You know, there's a few things like that that come through. But we are working on partnerships too. That's just part of the, we are exploring different avenues. Yeah, please don't think that it's just, okay, it's out there, it's done with. I mean, we are trying to be thoughtful of the priority projects and still move forward with.
I just wanted to, you never know the answer unless you ask.
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
Have an education.
Well, you know, it's funny you bring that up. Funny about that. Let's chat about that. No, I mean, it's Pleasant Park, the baseball field, it's the same category. It's a leftover item from a previous park. You know, so it was. There's two other projects I want to talk about. That just looking over the CIP in general that I feel kind of uncomfortable deferring. And it's one of those things where we have money in the fund balance that maybe this should be done sooner than later. And there are actually two that I haven't brought up before, but look at the list. There's some HVAC upgrades to Halley that, what was it? Old efficient R22A HVAC chiller units to R410. That sounds important. Like I was, you know, if you want to get scared, go Google what the R22A like coolant is or the refrigerant, how it's been phased out. And, you know, it was like the 70s where they're like, this stuff is dangerous. Don't ever use this again. So it's one of those things where I point out, like, we should do that sooner rather than later. And even our 410, like, again, Googling this project, not an expert, but it sounds like they've moved on to other more efficient coolants than that, refrigerants. So I propose if we have the money, that we just do this upgrade and keep deferring this year after year. If it's, you know, what we have there is bad and it's not going to get better. And the other item that I want to bring up is, Fleet Floor Epoxy and OSHA work zone safety markings. We have a money proposed project for 110K to, you know, remark some floors. Like, that sounds important too. Like, and that's in the future, you know, 5 years out. Did we just do that rather than defer that over and over?
Can I ask where you're looking real quick?
That's it's under town facilities.
It's two facilities.
So that one's been one that's been looked at essentially as part of the operating budget. And so they're looking at doing phasing to the garage to do what needs to be done. But part of that side, we need to specifically identify what needs to be there in terms of spacing. And then at what point they could actually do, because we had talked about doing half of the bays and then the other half of the bays, because we can't close all the bays at one time, obviously. So we're looking at like basically phasing
So it's
that.
operational phasing involving you doing that? Okay.
So that one in particular is tied more on an operating level. It was submitted as a CIP item because it exceeded the threshold, but that's more of an operating item.
Okay. All right, and that makes sense. I just want to say while the video is being recorded, that the need for OSHA
Yeah.
markings on our fleet floors, I'm not, I mean, we pay for doing that.
Yeah, no, we make sure everything's still operational. A lot of these are more like, you know, sometimes it's just updates. Sometimes it's already like it's in the plan, like, or we may already meet standards of code, but then you need how to kind of just routine maintenance, maintenance and that sort of thing.
Yeah, and I will say, like, in terms of the chiller, that's been something, those are things that we started replacing. It was on a phase plan, so we had all of our different facilities, so then it was, all right, let's start doing the replacement. So we've done like town hall, community center. Yeah, we did 2 this year. So the community center and town hall, or the police department. And we did the police.
2 of them were this year.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I think the police department last year and town hall and community center this year.
Those are probably really good EPA grant possibilities if we get them too. I bet that money coming in.
You know what this R22A stuff is? No?
Oh, yeah, it's a refrigerant, but it's, you know, the ozone killing, like, you know, kills the whales, all that sort of stuff. I would say just do it.
Still not seeing that one.
It's under facility, public facilities, it's the third one down. It's split up for next year. We're not,
All right,
it doesn't pass, but we're not.
As you mentioned.
That's in the description, the CIP.
Oh.
The CIP book is attached to the budget book link that was sent. Or printed for you, yeah. You get to the back, there should be CIP or supplemental.
Alright.
And so there's project descriptions for each one of those items.
I had gotten just been through the first 2 years, or first year, I guess.
It's a lot of information to digest,
All right, good, thank you.
certainly no doubt about that. But yeah, we can keep you posted on that, what that schedule looks like.
Just to provide a little comment on what Member Mahaffey is saying. I mean, I understand and appreciate the need for that, but I'm assuming that when the recommendations were pushed, there's a number of factors and other issues that we're not seeing. I mean, for example, this is being pushed off for next year. I don't know whether or not that's due to regulatory requirements that require this has to be done by next year. I only know this because my HVAC runs on the same system and I've got to get it replaced next year. Or because they're stopped selling the coolant. Yeah, old systems, it is what it is. Or whether or not that's something that, based upon parts and supplies, just being able to get there. So, I mean, I'm assuming that there's a number of assumptions within these pushes. So I'm going to assume that those recommendations are kind of based upon the idea of some factors that we haven't been made aware of, but I'm sure you guys will let us know of any key issues that you think are necessarily salient or maybe necessary when we start looking at prioritization again.
And just to be clear, some of these are not ones that we've pushed. Some of these are still slated for the year in which they were requested for.
But I think what I'm happy to say, can we pull in, especially some of these smaller ones, right? Can we just go get them done? Right? We have the money, let's just do this.
So it's not always a
Yeah.
money thing. Sometimes it's a staff capacity thing. Or it could be a new technology thing that's going to come out the next year, so they know they want to be prepared for it that year. So there's a whole lot of things going into some of these decisions that you only really know when you get to that manager level of that particular facilities manager, so to speak.
Yeah, but isn't that why we're sitting here? Like, can I ask the question, is there an issue with doing the HVAC upgrade today versus next year other than budget constraints? Is there an issue like capacity or something else that I'm not aware of?
I think that's what Marty is saying. We may not know, but the facilities manager may know, so we can circle back in.
We don't have facilities.
All right, well.
Yeah,
that's part of the
that
problem,
position is
yeah.
vacant.
All right, well, can I get that answer then? Like, let me know if there's anything I'm not aware of besides just money, because I wanted, and let me offer to them, unless you have anything else, let's see if we will move on. For a lot of small projects, certainly ones less than 100,000, I think they'll oversee on CIP, but other sometimes program projects, but even some of these smaller ones, to your point, Mr. Happy. Amanda does a really good job of trying to move some of these forward. There are times that there's budget requests and they want to, if we're looking at it for next year, and then as we get closer to the end of the year and we start realizing what our actual is going to be, coming back to that question, she'll say, we actually are going to have the money to do this now. And we do move things up. For instance, I'll give you an example, like the EV vehicles. We have actually have 3 full vehicles for town hall, anybody in town hall to use. We have the plug-in hybrid, and then we have a 1999 Jeep Cherokee and a
98.
98, sorry, Jeep Cherokee, and a Ford Explorer that I don't know how it's over either. So, they are not our environmentally friendly ones as much as I love cheap and everything else, but we are going ahead and pulling it up. Instead of next year, we look at the budget, we feel that we are in a place that we can actually go ahead and pull those into this current year without affecting the budget. Like, we have the funds that we can go ahead and do that and go ahead and replace those now. We don't have to worry about affecting the budget moving forward and everything else. So we look at those and do try and pull those in, and they are both electric. That's how we know the Kia is more than a Mach. And so anyways, that's what we're looking at pulling. So we do, the budget team does a really good job of trying to balance that. So it's good to have the direction on what y'all are seeing though, and some of the projects you guys keep an eye on. But we will definitely keep an eye on those things and make sure that if that opportunity arises, we will take advantage of that.
So we do pull forward things that will potentially have like a further delay, or a potential issue. So like with vehicles, when they open in July 1, us and every other municipalities, we're just in the queue. Like it's just wherever you end up in the queue. So if there's something that we can do to pull some things forward, if it's a priority, if it's been established or identified as a priority or a greater need, then we pull that forward as well. So we've had things like in the fleet shop that we've pulled forward. We had issues and safety concerns with one of the lifts. So we've pulled that forward so they can go ahead and do that. So we identify those different things throughout the fiscal year as well. So this is the strategic goal alignment stuff. So we started this a couple years ago. It kind of gives you that menu that ties back to your strategic goals. Some of these are new items, from staff, like the Peak Lifestyle Benefit Program or the transcription for meeting minutes or the 311 customer service. Some of these are specific from council and some of the things that you've identified as a priority or initiative. And that's things like the neighborhood program, grant program, and the historical marker program expansion. Any questions on those?
The big one is the camp track out thing. So
just to be clear, what's identified here in terms of the Parks and Rec camp program and class expansion, that is not specific to the track out camp. So this is also expanded programs for the Halley Center, the Community Center, and Senior Center as well.
okay, yeah, where I came from, the county was the one who provided a lot of these like recreational things for. In terms of that, I'm guessing in Wake County that is not the case. It's municipalities that do this kind of thing, right? That's why we're talking about expanding it.
Some of both. I mean, it depends on where you are, but you have a lot more municipal coverage in Wake County than some other counties. Such that it depends. And it's also proximity to. I mean, I know there are Wake County parks not too far away. But I don't know what programming that they do have. I don't know that they have the level of programs that like the other municipalities in Wake County have for track out and summer camp. Like I don't know what we're trying to do. That's very, it is variable, Mr. Gann, depending on which county you go. Where you guys.
It's strange to me because maybe I shouldn't. It's strange to me because a lot of the stuff occurred in the schools, like the basketball leagues that we played in, and like they use the school gyms, and like here we don't have that, and so we're trying to fight the school, and we had the issue with the schools, and it's like it seems like the county. Logical to me, the county provides a lot more of these kind of human services for kids, kind of related things, because it's schools already.
You know, my prior jurisdiction is
okay.
And so like I say, I think it's just variable. I've seen it where I grew up, it was almost all the county.
Okay.
But my last jurisdiction where I served, it was the municipality.
If they want it here, it has to be us doing it.
I guess. I think if you want anything, but yeah, I mean, it's the county I think does offer some things, but it's on what level you get to.
Okay.
That's a slightly different question. Are we maxed out on solar panels on Apex facilities?
There's
No.
a study going on right now, or what that looks like. This, we're working out. That contract is just getting started. They have visited some of the facilities. And they're working on that project to determine the maximum amount of solar that we can get in each of the facilities. And that goes right down through everything, it's a shelter. They'll come back, recommend a certain amount of solar. At some point, they'll say, okay, you only have this much area. It's not, it's not worth doing because the cost per kilowatt hour that you're going to get is up here. Cost per kilowatt hour for this facility over here is this amount. They're going to provide us basically a whole list. And so we're going to say, well, this is the best bang for our buck. This is the worst bang for our buck. And this is our cutoff line. Here up, we want to do it all. And then we can generate what projects will look like to be able to go out and build that.
Thank you.
You anticipate that'll come back as a budget amendment when it's done, or will it not be done this fiscal year? The actual study.
The study will be done this year. I mean, like over the next 6 months, whatever it's done.
And then potentially.
But there's no
Always there.
earmark in the CFP right now for future solar investment.
We don't.
We had no idea what that cost would be.
Right.
We're trying to generate what, again, that whole priority list and what it would cost. And then we could say we want to spend X dollars per year, or we could say we want to spend this total amount to them all, however council decides they want to do it. And then we can put the projects together in the CIP, whether it's a 1-year plan, 2-year plan, 3-year plan, whatever it is. Because you get much more bang for your buck, do more facilities versus one here, one there. And so we're trying to put it all together and make a comprehensive package.
But we do have solar on the majority of our facilities.
Right, and so I know that was a big investment several years ago, but since then, there's been, this is the best of my knowledge, no incremental capacity added, so I was just curious.
We'll also be incurring a project or paying for a project where Gary's looking at putting solar at the treatment plant. So that work will roll into the capital projects that they do at the plant, and then we will basically see that as just part of our 23% bill.
All right, so nonprofit support. So this is just a summary of the agencies that have applied. We had 3 that were added to the list. So we're waiting for recommendation from our finance committee members, and we can share with you what that is when we get that. So no pressure. I'm sorry?
How many applications did you have?
I'm sorry.
This is all of them. We did have one more who withdrew.
The Public School
Okay, so
Foundation
most of them got funded.
withdrew.
Applications.
So right now it's, because we have the per capita funding limitation of 75,000. So basically right now we've got 103,000 requested. So we've got to cut down to 75.
Can you just provide a little context on like the initial number of applications and then how we got to 3?
So, so I'm gonna certainly blame this on Mr. Graham, Mr. Mahaffey. But so we had the initial applications, then we had Apex Public School Foundation withdrew and said they weren't gonna do that program this year. They asked questions about, well, why are these people not applying for applying? You know, these people have applied in the past. Why did they not apply this year? So my team reached out and asked, was there any constraints to our process or whatever else that could be keeping them from applying? We found that some of them had staff changes. And so they were unaware of our deadline a couple years ago. Was it last year? I had let them know that I would not be reaching out to them, reminding them to apply every year. That basically we set the due date as February 28th. If any of our requirements changed, that I would reach out to let them know that the requirements or deadlines had changed. But outside of that, you know, it was their responsibility to kind of maintain that on their funding calendar. So I didn't feel like it was fair to do that for some entities, but not others. So, so with that staff transition, it kind of fell off some of their radar. So that led to us opening back up, and we received 3 applications in that time period. So really, truly, they made it just more difficult on themselves because originally I think they're like $200 off from being able to fund everything. So now they'll have to make some decisions. So
Well, it was, who were the 3? It was Western Wake, Crisis, it was Interact, and it was,
Fiesta.
who was it?
Yeah.
So those are the 3 who, you know, we were curious why they didn't apply and reached out to them, and they didn't send them out.
Did Fiesta only request 5,000? Because I know they're the only ones that went down.
That's a interesting situation. So they actually requested 3 different amounts in 3 different places of the application. Some of those, so Jessica went through a lot of those and to identify what would be a eligible expense because part of that was, an emergency fund.
Yeah, one of it is an emergency fund, which isn't going towards a specific program, which is what our nonprofit is based off it. And then the rest was either personnel costs or intern funding, which is the same as personnel. So the only actual programming funding and expenses was the 5,000. That's what we put as the eligible, what would be an eligible funding.
And the thing that was kind of the concern is like using Fiesta as an example. We're like, wait, this is an organization that helps people within our community. They aren't coming to the table. Is it our fault? Did we do something? So it was good to be able to get them back in, and it helps us explain some of the goal is still to try to help those who are helping our citizens, our residents. That's what we want to do. And when they were absent at the table, that just seemed odd. So I appreciate Amanda and her team going out and asking the questions, because we don't want to leave anybody behind. That's helping us not leave anybody behind.
And that's one thing that Brian will be working on next year is identifying different ways to be pushing out that information. Different avenues outside of us individually contacting nonprofits.
What about the White Oak Foundation? Because they're usually requesting funds, at least they did every year that.
I don't believe they've requested for the past 3 years.
Yeah, this is the third year.
So we'll let you know what the finance committee's ultimate recommendation is.
Oh, so we're not gonna discuss this today, really?
Don't need time.
Yeah, any thoughts?
Anything else?
I have two questions and one comment. The comment is, I'd be the farmer's market differently now that they're not on a public property, by the way. I see it as benefit to Beaver Creek Shopping Center as much as it is to the community. That's the comment. The questions are, Save Child, I noticed I looked at last year's, they requested some money and we reduced it from their initial request because there was like operation versus like capital, whatever. And I looked at this Champion Our Children, it's out there in East Raleigh. So I'm kind of like wondering, is there gonna be a recommendation about trying to separate kind of operational things, which I think is maybe worth funding, versus things related to development, which especially in Raleigh, which I would say maybe are not worth funding. So that'd be a question, I guess, for you guys later. And then for Western Wake, I thought we had this program that was supposed to be going toward utility bill.
We do, the customer
And
assistance.
is that gonna be separate from this?
It is.
Okay, how so?
It's always been 2 separate programs.
Is it late versus they just can't pay it, or like what's our current program versus what is this gonna do for utility bills?
So this is just in addition to the supplements. This is for utility bills and rental assistance. And
Okay, but has the utility bill thing gotten used up at this point?
it has not. So we'll
I
actually
think it
be
would.
bringing a contract and budget amendment to you before the end of the fiscal year.
I think also these funds are more general, like they have more flexibility in how they assist people with these funds.
Okay.
This could be for rental stuff, this could be for whatever gap finance someone might need, that might come to rate. Whereas our utility assistance program is a very rigid, you apply, you have this number of dollars per year and you fill it out, you have to meet certain requirements. So but I mean, these are the best dollars we can spend here. These are money that's going directly to help people, like right directly to someone,
I support the policy of the $1 thing. I know that there's probably pressure not to do that anymore. I just think they're charities and we're not, people can choose to donate to these groups. So I think having that limit I like that limit. So I hope we're not turning toward,
We're not like this, that's the issue. We have $100 grand in requests.
I see the issue, and I want to support 75,000 personally and try to make sure we stay within that is my preference because of
Based on
the charitable. Yeah,
Well, in the budget that was managed to adopt says 75,000. So
The challenge is we're gonna have, whatever your thoughts are, allocating 75,000 between these applicants, and clearly everyone can't get the form out. That adds up to more than $75,000. So
I am curious, what your thoughts are, on the Apex Farmers Market since it did move and is not looking to come back.
My views are very much in line with Councilman Gath, which is when it was downtown, when it was centrally located, I think the intent was to try to showcase local vendors, local businesses in an environment that would essentially attract folks more downtown to help kind of be a circulator of business. People come for the farmer's market, they stay downtown. It's kind of a self-generating cycle. I think once they move out and now they're kind of, out in a environment that is much more commercial, I think it becomes harder for us as a town to explain why we're putting that money out there. I just feel like it's a little easier for us to justify giving to a profit generating entity. Why we're supporting them when we're trying to support local downtown businesses. A little harder for us to generate that same level of justification if they're just in a commercial area.
I agree with that. I'm not really sure if I'm in favor of farmers markets on this list. As far as Safe Child is concerned, though, I think that's a service that we use through like the police. When we find misconduct situations with children and abusive situations, Safe Child is the organization that based in Raleigh, which is probably the reference to Raleigh here. But,
Right, no, I'm just saying, I think we reduced it last year from what they applied for because we split out what their operating costs were to help out Apex Children versus the site development thing they're talking about here.
They're doing a facility expansion,
Yeah.
and program expansion. So part of this is they're operating, and then part of this is, the capital investment in the facility expansion.
I'm frankly uninterested in helping with the capital things like that. The operating one I am interested in still. So that's why I feel about that.
Like you need to have a capital project to expand your capacity before you have additional operating budget to.
If it was an Apex, I may feel differently, but it's out there in Newbern Avenue, so I'm kind of like.
I would say if they're serving Apex citizens, it doesn't matter where they are, whether
I'm
they're
thinking
outside the boundaries or.
I'm thinking about where I would make the reductions to get 75,000.
Okay, I mean,
I
get you.
So, and then the Apex Police Department they do refer a lot of cases to, and you probably remember, they've been a partner with Apex Police Department for a long time. And so we do refer a significant number of cases to them for that service.
It's my understanding, we actually give more than any other Wake County municipality towards.
Yes, I saw that, which was surprising to me. Surprising to me.
I wish there were a couple of other communities that raised take our example, raise the amount that they're paying.
Gary did 4,500 last year, I noticed, in the notes at least.
Can I just ask a question about the farmers market? What exactly did they present, if I can ask, as far as what they use the money for? What does it go toward?
So part of it goes to their contracted service for the
Coordination and management of
The program.
organization of the.
There was some marketing in there too. It's part of the request.
There's some more.
And I'm certainly not saying that they shouldn't receive anything. I still think it's an important program to support because we're ultimately helping that local business and smaller business component. But it becomes harder to say you moved away from where we wanted you, but you get more money. And if we could use this as an incentive for them to move back, I think that not that we're incentivizing them based on money, but I think it's a lot easier for them to justify an increase for that sort of allocation if they were local.
Question why Interact was not funded.
They didn't request anything last year. And they were the ones that we reached out to said, hey, again, that's in the category of this is a nonprofit, which is serving Apex citizens in need. And I think that when a nonprofit provides services to one of our citizens, I think it's appropriate for us to support that nonprofit.
it wasn't reduced. There just wasn't it wasn't allocated.
Good question. And the $3,000, that's what they asked for. Like we didn't go to them and say, hey, ask for this amount. We just said, hey, would you like to apply?
Yeah. If it was up to me, I would reduce the amount for the farmers market. That on the others.
We're gonna need to do more than that, right? Get 75,000, if that's still a council.
And understanding that if they received funding last fiscal year, we don't release the funding until they've completed their year-end report as well. So just because we do allocate it doesn't mean that they'll necessarily receive it. We've got to have the accurate reporting to show that they spent it in line with what they said they were going to in the purpose that you all approved.
The Carolina Swim Foundation said actually like at an Apex pool where they teach that, or do we go out of town for that?
It is not. It's in Cleary, I believe. So, but they ask about where they live and they map out where the participants that they're teaching come from to ensure that it's town of Apex residents that they're funding with the.
And this, they teach underserved, served children, and they're partnering with, White Oak Foundation to ship. Very positive.
And we did tell them, because there were things that they did apply for that didn't meet the public purpose statutory authority test. So we did have to adjust for that last fiscal year, or this current fiscal year. So.
Is there a potential reduction in that 10,000?
This year, since that happened with last year's funding, this year they only
They just
applied
rounded up,
for
okay.
the items that did qualify.
All right.
You guys are gonna meet, I forget who's on the committee, you guys are gonna meet and make recommendations to us at some point soon.
We have a sheet to fill out.
She will fill out and then you'll get the recommendation and then you guys can say, and I appreciate the feedback because that's helps me as we're playing the get to 75K game a
And
lot easier.
Procedurally, like this sheet isn't part of the budget, right?
It is not. So you
The
guys,
budget is 75K.
Yeah, so it's-
so
And
you
then in
guys,
the policy, we adopt this.
so you guys will provide that to me, and then we'll go through and line things up to make sure that there's consensus. So, we'll kind of go back and forth if you guys need to have kind of some discussions about, where you are not in agreement with the recommendation. And then we'll push that back out to council so that the full council is able to see that, because that'll be incorporated in the budget.
So last year's budget had more, I was looking it up, they had more information than just these purpose, there's some notes and stuff, man, that will be part of this as well.
Yes,
For our
this is just a summary for the presentation.
You look at the application they go on.
It's in the draft budget too. The
Your applications are,
I don't
Not
get-
the
I don't get
applications,
much,
but the-
a wider chart.
Yeah.
okay, I need to look at it again.
But we are certainly happy to share the applications if that's something that you guys want or requesting.
I think the notes were fine.
A lot of it's stuff that we go through and verify with their documentation that they submit.
But feel free to talk to us. I'm more than happy to take. We're just making recommendations. We just want to,
It's heard from me.
always great. And if you change your mind or something else comes up,
I am interested in getting farmers market back to downtown somewhere, and if this can be a lever, I would like, I don't know about a hammer versus a pick, but like, I would like them to come back.
I'm
personally.
not sure if we can use the word lever or hammer, but I do think, there might be appropriate incentive.
I mean, they're an independent organization.
Yeah.
I know.
But at the end of the day,
Yeah, I know.
they come with it.
All right. Are you guys ready to move on to utilities or
Let's do it.
Yes.
take a break or wait for Mr. Killingsworth? Keep going? Okay. So just under 29 million for water sewer. This is an increase of 3.32% from the amended budget. Again, the majority of this is charges for service, almost 84%, because this is a enterprise fund, so it is fully supported by the rates and fees that are charged for the service. The next slide shows the trends in our annual water and sewer customer growth over time. So we're looking at customer growth estimated for 3.4 for FY '24. For the rates, we're looking at the base rate remaining flat, 4% increase in volumetric rate, sewers 4% increase, and outside rates are double for that. So you can see what the FY '23 rate is, FY '24, and then the difference. So combined in terms of a water bill, sewer bill, and a combined bill, you can kind of see folded across there with 5 what that difference is, and then also what the cumulative cost difference would be for both. So about 278. So the majority of you guys kind of saw this I think at the joint committee workshop, but this is kind of what we're looking at programming over time. 5-year plan for water and sewer. Sewer kind of looking at 4%, water looking at 3%. The impact on the unrestricted reserve balance, and then The chart on the lower left shows you what that increase would look like on our annual bill for each one of those years, provided if we did that increase. And then the last one is our debt service coverage and target. So this ties back to our cash financial plans for water and sewer. So in black, you'll see the revenue. That's the revenue under the existing rates. And then green is like the proposed rates and where we need to be in order to cover existing debt service, proposed debt service, cash funded capital outlay, and our operating expenses.
The proposed debt service for the sewer, like accounting for the outfit of the Western facility, like the capacity increase.
Part of that, yes. So, and that's a lot of that's tied to some system expansion things over time. So that will be, we've got Big Branch Water, we've got, geez, I can't remember now. Is it in this one or is this just general fund? Just general. I can't remember. We just programmed all this out. I know there's copious amounts of
Right,
information.
I think you answered my question.
Yeah, so that FY 27. Yeah, so that's where we're looking at facility relocations. We've got jumps in from Western Wake, Cary projects, facility relocations, and the phase 2 expansion. The debt service would be, the phase 2 expansion would be in 27. So we would do the project start in 26, but since it would be debt funded, payments would start the next fiscal year. Thank
Big
you.
Branch debt servicing is in here too or no?
We can look at that. So yes, kind of. So there's two things that we're looking at with Big Branch. So because Big Branch is that $40 million threshold, so we were looking at doing 20 from reserves and 20 as a revenue bond for debt service.
And is the 20 for revenue bond represented in that green bar there?
It is.
It is.
So there's actually two debt services proposed. One is that Big Branch, and the other is a $30 million project from the Cary CIP.
Yeah. In terms of, I wonder how it works out with the revenue from a capacity expansion like that or any other project like that. Because we're gonna get revenue from connection fees, right?
So basically, what you're doing is when you're doing the revenue bonds, you're promising those future revenues to pay that debt service.
Yes, but in the
So-
lineup that it's not gonna affect rates, that the connection fee should offset the debt payments on that. Is that the idea?
Not necessarily, because some of that is tied to your customer growth, right? Because you're gonna have customer growth and usage from that. And that's why it's spread out over time. But you're saying we will either have like that revenue growth from the addition of new customers, or that revenue growth from what you would have to increase the rates to meet that requirement, financial requirement,
I guess
or a combination thereof.
would a rate increase necessarily be required because of new growth, or is the idea you're financing the connection costs should equal roughly the construction costs over time? Like we recover
Right.
our.
You're not
$40
putting
million.
the burden of that system expansion on existing utility customers. It would be, your future customers that would benefit from that as well.
Yeah, so that's the idea.
And part of that is the capital reimbursement fees. So that's part of the 20 million financing from capital reserves, is because we're saying, okay, well, these capital reserves are restricted for system expansion. They are paid in for that system to add capacity.
That's
So
20
that's
million
how
you
we're
have today from previous system expansion, right?
I'm sorry.
So the 20 million from reserves are from previous system expansion that we built up a reserve from. Do something.
So the capital reserve is just developer fees. They're capital reimbursement fees that are paid by developers for the system development fees. So they're saying, hey, well, we're allocating this much capacity, right, to this house, this neighborhood, this commercial building or whatever else, because we understand that once we hit max capacity, we will have to purchase more capacity.
I get it. My point is that fund will be replenished by the fee we collect from the system that we're expanding.
That is your hope.
That is what now?
That is the hope.
That's
There's
the hope.
legislation out there that is and always potential legislation every year that wants to limit our abilities to collect system development. Including there's some legislation out there this year that would impact the level that we could recover. So we do our best based on what we've got right now, but that's subject to change.
So we could be emptying our reserves to fund this project, and then a law would pass, oh, you can't replenish that by new connections to your new system.
I would say that's possible.
We can't plan on
That's always.
future legislation, right?
No, right thing
Hope
about
it
it.
didn't happen.
I take every opportunity to complain about.
No way.
Yeah.
Well, it's a benefit of being a creature of the state, right?
Yeah.
Like your powers and authorities are what they give you.
Benefits, is that the right word?
No, on the expenditure side, you'll kind of see personnel continues to be the highest cost. Operating purchases for resale, so that's tied to that system growth and those costs. And then we see the increase in capital. We'll show you what that looks like. So expenditures, we're adding one utility field supervisor. So that was a request as part of the multi-year plan with the water sewer team. Vehicles and equipment, you have an assortment of equipment, vehicle replacements, and then upgrades for the treatment plant, which include like the compactor. And capital projects include the AMI, that's a transfer from fund balance. So that is the remaining amount needed on the water side for the AMI project based on the estimate at this time, which is not a bid, so it's an estimate.
Does the water in AMI, is it the same as the power AMI?
Yes, it's it will have, so the infrastructure that will talk, so the backbone, if you will be the same for electric as it is for water.
Oh, that's good. Okay.
There'll be some shared costs between both utilities, and then there'll be some that are solely water and some that are solely electric.
The actual instruments don't mix, but you're saying the backbone is
Communication.
together. Okay.
So it's
Nice.
basically licensed radio. But in this particular system that we're looking at, the electric stands on its own talk to that system to bring the data into our system. And the water works independently and reads into that same system. It does not have to go through the electric or vice versa.
It'd be great to have that. I'm excited.
It's data, so it can't be a bad thing. So again, big branch, Highway 55 booster pump upgrades. As part of the operating budget, we do also have a lot of upgrades and work for maintenance and repair for our pump stations. We got a line connection on Roberts Road. Sunset Hills Pump Station is bid this month. Is slated for this month. This will be, sorry, I keep putting you on the spot. You love it, Brad?
I look like a former water resources director.
You do. So Sunset Hills will be actually funded out of ARPA funds. So this will be a transfer from that fund as well. And then part of that phase 2 expansion with the Western Lake Reclamation Facility. The current fund balance is approximately 67 million. So we're waiting that final FY22 audit and finance postings. So for the difference, what Sean explained earlier in terms of fund balance. We do include use of 4.1 and then capital reserves, which are restricted. That's what we talked about, the system development fees that are paid into. We're looking at use of 20.9 million for FY24. Any questions on water sewer? So moving on to stormwater, 2.6 in revenues. So this is an increase over FY23. Charges for service account for 2.5%. We have transitioned erosion and site inspection fees over to the stormwater funds, which were previously in the general fund, because that team resides under stormwater as well. This is kind of a decision point. So this is something that's been presented to you guys as potentially creating that 5th tier for the stormwater fund. And staff has recommended or asked that this would be effective in January. to look at. So
It says July there. I was surprised by that.
what's, oh, to residential July 1. So that's the fee schedule, because the fee schedule is adopted July 1, but it would be effective. We'd make a note that it would be effective January 1st.
Okay.
Keep feeling like I need to write it. And I'm like, you. She makes notes in OneNote and shares them. She's very efficient.
I think we already, we just want to around.
Yes.
It's been decided.
Yeah, yeah. Let's.
Concurrence.
Okay, so can I get a okay, amen?
Yes.
All right, yeah. All right. On the expenditures, we've got some highlights. One is adding the addition of the stormwater engineer. And then also some things that I identified that we're legally obligated to repair, like the spillway repair at Lake Pond, and the Seagroves Farm Dam repair. Additionally, this will contract for phase 2 of our condition assessment, which kind of will help us prioritize and identify what that capital reserve for stormwater capital projects will need to look over time. And then we do have some money that are put in there for emergency repairs from that condition assessment if there's something that we need to go ahead and address immediately. Everybody goes,
What are skid steers? I don't
know.
To the Bobcat, right?
Okay.
basically, and you've got,
Track, yeah.
it's a small tractor with a variety of attachments. So you can use it to mow, you can use it as like a bucket to dig,
Front loader.
yeah. Is everybody good with stormwater?
Yes.
Yes. Is everybody ready to move on to electric?
Sure.
Okay. So, projected revenues just under 52 million. So this is an increase of 6.9% over FY 23. Charges for service again account for the majority, almost 87%, for $45 million. So we still have the electric rate study. We do have the models updated. Cost of service information's been updated. Rate designs been updated with the exception of incorporation of the solar rate and EV charging rate that was presented with Mr. Brown at the last workshop. We are currently balanced with a 5.5% increase. Originally, that was the discussion we had. We knew it was going to be at a minimum, best case scenario, 4% increase, because that includes the campus increase of 3.5% in 24. They'll have 2% increases scheduled out right now through 2027. We were just notified of a true up with Duke Energy that was planned and slated for at 48 million. It is coming in at 68 million. The rate committee for electricities will be meeting in September to have a discussion about how to allocate out those costs to the different member systems and over what time period, et cetera. We will need to return those funds.
What? Like, we owe Duke $68 million?
Not Apex, the
Electricity.
electricity, correct.
So how does this work? What is a true up? Why do we owe this $68 million? I thought we had a contract, we paid them based on the contract. It's part of the contract, so we can just ask for $68 million more.
There-
No, it ties into your
Riders.
license. So it's all these different riders that work out. So,
Riders. Tons of riders.
Okay.
as of when we set that 3.5% number that we knew was coming, that they were going to raise, that originally was based on their estimates of it being 48-ish, right? So they took a certain amount of money of working capital and they paid that. And that was through October of last year. And they estimated it would be 6 million-ish for October, or November, December. That number came in much, much larger. So that's going to be a true up of 20 million. That's going to have to be addressed. That will be distributed to the members of electricity. We'll have some piece of that. We don't know exactly what that number will be, because there's a lot of other things that go into that calculation, including some credits that will not be known until after July this year.
But the basics are, the electricity's contract with Duke is riders for Duke's fuel costs.
Well, assortment of things.
Yes,
There-
assortment of things.
That's one of many.
But if natural gas is expensive one year, or coal is expensive or whatever, then they can pass those costs on to the members,
That's
and
correct.
that's what that is.
That's what that is. And that is,
It's making an average.
It's a grid,
of all
it's
their
all part of
generation
everything, right?
capacity.
It's a whole system.
so, and understanding that this $20 million, like this amount, this is not specific to Apex. This
Yeah,
is not Apex system. This is the 32 member systems, 32.
And that was a relief when I realized that a few minutes ago, because it
Sorry.
looked scary at first, like true up cost 68 million, like.
Well, I wanted to get it on there because I was like, well, we definitely need to hit this point, but I probably could have worded that differently so that you did not have,
So,
heart palpitations. So I apologize.
so even with that, like Duke raised rates like 17% this year, right? Is
I
that
think it's 18 actually.
18%? So is that due to the same underlying factors, like their costs are increasing or their fuel costs are going up?
Their stuff is totally different. Well, I
There-
mean, I don't know how
Okay.
they generate. They're incorporating, making profit in there and anything utility commission will ultimately charge.
So is that how this works? Is there's a true up of previous purchases, not like a future rates going forward? It seemed weird to me that you would true up what we've already bought from them as opposed to be rolled into the next contract.
It's because of fuel costs, true up fees, you don't know what the fuel's going to be. So if that's,
You've
you
got-
have these set costs and then all these other potential costs
Yeah.
that can raise.
I know some,
There's a lot of things in there basically to capture, to ensure that Duke is not gonna be out anything.
I have a question. This is like out of left field. Has Chatham County, Wake County ever considered a hydroelectric plant around Jordan Lake?
I have no idea.
Where I grew up, that's what we had because we had a lot of rivers around where we were. So, and it was super cheap cost.
I think it needed to be designed that way from the beginning, really, because it was. I'm not sure what the reason why.
Like I said, it's out of left field. It's just something that popped in my
Well,
head when I'm seeing.
it's not that elected, like, don't some electricities towns actually build their own power plants? Like they get legislation or whatever, and they'll build like a natural gas.
They used to, I think, do that. Right now they stopped.
There's a few
They
that
got
have, but yeah, to your point, they have special permission, like Greenville can produce. We cannot produce under the contract.
And it's been a bad deal for some communities, right? I've heard about these like
I
places.
don't know for sure. I'm not in a position to say. There seemed to be a bad deal for Greenville, but I don't know. I'm not in the workings of like what they do.
No,
So
they,
I can't really honestly answer
A
that.
friend of mine is on the city council in Kings Mountain. And they got like 3 natural gas plants and they love it. I think it's the best thing ever. But I think they partnered with some company that built them and they are able to buy gas at a certain rate, but I think they needed special legislation.
Yeah, either way, there had to be legislation. Contracts.
So how does that work then if we, together with Kerry, put a solar requirement, like, are they generating power then? Okay, it's not a gas plant.
And providing power to the plant itself. So at Cary, that's also their own new system. They're not on the effective system. At the one point.
So-
Man, you're doing a great job. Looks like we have 4 pages left. Maybe 5 o'clock, I think.
What's my heart stop? What time is it? All right, so this is so also we want to look at a gradual increase of cash on hand from 90 to 120. So we had looked at doing 90. Really, truly, the recommendation is to look at having 120. So there we go. So this basically shows the recommended increases kind of over the next 4 years, just based on the information that we have currently. And then the, operating cash, that's going to show your days cash on hands down here at the bottom. And then right here in this dark green line, which I guess I could have highlighted in a different color, shows you what the rate would be with that rate increase. And then underneath would be our average customer bill. So you can kind of see how that would trend, right, over time. But again, we're only looking at FY24. which would be here.
What's our baseline on the covered bill?
So this would be the base rate. The base rate would go up $1.38. It's currently $25. And then your kilowatt goes up.
But for the average customer, I think I saw it in the $5.5 or something.
I believe it was, okay,
More than that.
6 and something, maybe. Oh, $7.36.
Seven.
$6.32 for 950 kilowatts. Our average is 1,150, so it would be $7.36. It's a lot of numbers. So, and then this kind of just gives you there we go. That gives you kind of like the breakdown. So it's being passed through all of our different rate types, including our small, medium, and large general service and time splits and fee. So with this,
Sorry, we're thinking about that time of use stuff we discussed. Is that going to be maybe next year's budget? We're going to talk about doing that possibly, or is that going to be like a
for
5-year
for solar,
Yeah, yeah. For next year,
hopefully,
once we have the AMIs in, I
we gotta
guess it'll be.
we gotta look at
Okay.
the timeline for AMI and the timeline for ERB.
Yeah, next year will be, we'll have to kind of evaluate whether next year's feasible or not. It might be the year.
Might be 2 years from now.
Right, because just get AMI in place. But the hope is that this fall, we have a direction on what method you want to see set up.
Yeah.
And we're installing AMI, then we're actually putting it in place.
Okay, cool.
We'll be start moving forward with the ERP setup as well for. in
Maybe next year we have-
July.
Maybe next year we can have a more complete discussion about what that all looks like.
That'd be good.
The following year, following fiscal year budget.
So this is just our comparison to Duke Energy. Apex current is in yellow. Proposed is in green. We are still lower than Duke Energy, and this is pre 18% increase. This is also, I'm sorry,
You say pre-18% increase?
it is.
Wow.
So, this is their current rates. This is based off their current rates. And then the, Wake Forest, which I think they were looking at a 14, of 2.5% increases.
So why are we comparing to Wake Forest as the local?
Because the Wake Forest is an electricity as well.
They're the only other one in Wake County.
I see. Alright.
But why are we so much cheaper than that? They're awesome.
Got a great people. They got great people too, but
Greater people here. Someone say the greatest.
Greater than.
So, which was something that, Mr. Mahaffey had wanted to see.
Yeah, no, I love the chart. Like, this is the most important thing, you know. Details are important too, but this is what we've done.
I'm still trying to make up for that environmental education center thing. So here's the monthly impact. Just started here. Man, you guys are always ahead of me on the slides. So with that, we're looking at the average customer, $7.36. So in terms of our expenditure, we're looking at a 6.9% increase over the FY23 amended budget. Part of this is tied to that purchases for resale, what we're expecting, because it is a pass-through, since we are a purchaser of not a generator of the power. So one of the other things you'll see is that increase in capital. So the increase in capital is tied to a couple of different things. So part of it is tied to vehicles and equipment. But a large chunk of that is tied to our system expansion, and that's something that we're running into this fiscal year as well, is that system expansion and the costs and the pace of that are much faster than our revenues are coming in. So this is kind of an indicator with the equipment, kind of the different things there. 2 personnel, so we'd be looking at adding 2 line techs halfway through the fiscal year. East Williams substation would be funded out of fund balance, which would be 1.8 million, and then the LED light replacement phased at like 3 years. And you guys, that was included in your weekly report too, information on the phase planning of that. The capital, the system expansion, we're looking at between 3.6 and 3.8 million for next fiscal year. This fiscal year, we're making some budget adjustments because of the increased cost. which I can, not at that slide yet.
Doesn't seem like a lot of capital and maintenance activity. Like, some vehicles and then equipment, but it's not much in terms of line maintenance or.
So in the operating budget, we've got utility, so because it's not capitalized, so maintenance and repair to the utility system is a line, and that's
It's operating budget.
it's part of the operating budget. And then the system expansion is captured under capital outlay improvements as part of the operating budget. It's not a separate capital project budget. And that's driving high this fiscal year, last fiscal year, and
So I'm thinking mostly maintenance, right? So are we keeping up with the infrastructure? But if there's just someone substating really like maintenance.
Well, we just spent a bunch of money on the Milano place not too long ago too. That was millions, forget the number, but
It's there, and the maintenance is there. It's just been different than the water and sewer with the way they give it. But they have a similar line item, water and sewer, maintain the lines, the equipment and all that. It's just not large enough to kind of fall in that capitalized, but it is there.
Speaking of system expansion, a question I had goes back to the fee schedule for the electric stuff at the start of the budget. There's some big increases for primary facilities, like the electric goes from $526 to like $3,000.
that's like the next slide, is it not? Let's see. All right, so we'll come back. Remind me to come back to the previous slide.
Go ahead.
I'm trying to tell you, you guys are ahead of me on every slide. So this is a recommendation from our electric utility director. Basically, what he has asked is that we match what the town is currently paying for each one of these. So this is what the town's currently paying per rate to contract out the service laterals and underground for these types of facilities.
So basically what we're saying is that our current fees don't cover our costs.
Our current fees do not come close to covering our current
So
costs.
we lose money when a home gets built.
Correct.
Which is electric.
So,
Well, with this, we won't, correct?
well, I mean, we may still, because those costs may increase, but this would basically bring it up to the level we are currently at. So I say this to say, the reason why this is kind of in here is basically because it's important for us to know, like, we're not just increasing on the rate side, right? So we're increasing, trying to capture like these system expansion costs and things like that too. So it's not just on the customers, this is kind of on the developers, and we're saying like, hey, look, we're kind of trying to share this out and balance it out.
Yeah, not to be like broken record here, but do we have any contacts for what Duke would charge in some municipalities for this type of service?
So Duke system is set up differently and their methodology for funding is different, but we can get you that information. Part of that is tied into how they charge their rates to cost.
Essentially, Duke will may put something in, but their rates are set up so they recover their investment in short, in a set amount of period. So that's the way they're driven, because we're not in a product of the business.
So that's why our bar is lower.
Right, so go back to the bar charts, like, it's a little bit misleading because they capture some of these install costs. In
So
their
they're catching profit. They're a full profit company, they're not. We're making money.
Profit, yeah. Okay, well then I like this.
And another single point that I have, is I believe it's Clayton, and I believe their cost for installs around, that they have figured their costs for their electrics around 4,000, the way they're calculating it. If you take our single family and add it to the service lateral, I don't know if their stuff was combined, that puts us at 3,600. So we're looking like we're in line with the number that I've heard from them. Henry.
Okay. Well, it sounds like that number being high helps us keep our rates low.
Yeah.
Make us whole, yes.
Great.
We're not trying to recoup all of the system expansion from rates.
Yeah.
We're increasing to capture that upfront. So, all right, now go back. So electric fund reserves. Current electric fund balance is 19 million. So we are again waiting, final 22 audit postings. But 3.3 million is available for appropriations, use and restrictions. So we're looking at use of 1.8 for that East Williams substation. Again, part of this will start with the order of a transformer that's going to take 18 to 24 months to receive. So that's why we're going ahead.
So what are the restrictions?
I'm sorry.
What are the restrictions on the rest of the balance?
We have to hold a certain amount due to the
Counts.
lag in the purchase and resale, purchase from O-Power and then the resale. There's always a lag in it, so we have to hold a certain amount in reserve to cover potential for.
It doesn't allow us to count the receivable. We have to wait for actual. All right, any questions on this one?
You know.
All right, we'll go forward to the, like, we could just skip like 2. So again, strategical alignment, this is in your budget book, so I won't spend too much time or any time going over that. So either goes too fast or too slow, right? So this is the cumulative rate, changes, the cumulative effect on, citizens. So we'll show like the solid waste fee, water, sewer, electric, stormwater remains flat. So you're looking at about a monthly change of about $11, for our average household. Property tax value, that's what you're looking at. Average home value in, Apex is around 400,000. So you're looking at about $10 per month or $120 per year. And then coming back to the first question that somebody asked, which is literally almost the last slide, is kind of showing this municipal cost comparison and where we fall. So that second column is our ratio, that's our tax base percent, residential to commercial. So we've been in that 80-20 mark for a while. You'll see in terms of cost, a lot of the 3 areas that are below us, Raleigh, Morrisville, and Cary, all have a different percentage of commercial as well. And so a lot of that could be potentially driving that cost difference. So.
And we have no, back to earlier conversation, there's really no good way to know what that number is gonna be in the future with what we've approved. Or you have an idea?
We need, I would like some time to evaluate that. Some of the man and I have talked about trying to look at a model that can project some of that. It's never going to be precise. It's a model.
Sure.
Reality changes on
The
that.
ballpark, like, is it
Yeah,
talking
I
about
feel-
moving it to 80.5 or is it going to like 78?
Yeah, I feel like we can try and generate something, and we want to, because we want to see where that goes. We want to try and, we don't really want to go any higher than 80 residential. We want to try and start going the other, change that ratio. But what's the impact about where we are, just at this point? So we're going to try and evaluate that. We're going to look at
And what impact would be necessary to move that needle?
Yeah, we don't know what that number will be. Move the needle.
It's gonna be a lot of fun.
The Morrisville, their distribution, that their rate is still relatively close to ours.
Yeah, so one thing to keep in mind too, under water and sewer, which I probably should have highlighted this. So City of Raleigh actually provides water and sewer to the majority of these places, Wake Forest, Rollsville. So Wake Forest sold their system, gosh, I don't know, years ago now, like 10 years ago now. So basically City of Raleigh provides the water and sewer services to a lot of those municipalities, which is why you see that same right there. So, and Morrisville does not provide their own water sewer. They are part of Cary.
Or Raleigh.
The other hard part is this is never an apples to apples comparison. I mean, there's different services, that different.
And different levels of
Yeah.
service.
So, we provide more services than any other. I'm careful I say that, but generally speaking. Like, yes, there's only one other electricity in Wake County, but at the same time, they don't have water and sewer. We have water and sewer. So we have water, we have electric, and we have all the standard services that you do. Plus some, the things that we're trying to provide and that we help with. So it's always kind of you try and get a comparison, but it's never going to quite be apples to apples. Best you can hope for is maybe different kind.
I was gonna say, remember, if you think back to your days in Peak Academy, remember, was the one service that we're required to provide. Yeah.
But I think it's interesting about this chart, and this is the first time I've seen this, is that residential commercial comparison across all municipalities, and man, like that's something. Look at that. It's just us and Wendell and Raleigh Springs.
Keep ways close to it.
Holly Springs, like.
Oh, you're talking about, are you talking about the ratio or?
We're talking the ratio, but I mean, Holly Springs has like
80-20.
3 huge projects that are off the land.
Coming
And
to-
when that's all done, they'll be 70-30, right?
Yeah, when,
Maybe, yeah.
That's their goal.
Yeah.
Roseville is 92.8. That's,
Even Wake Forest, man, like. Is that, what do they got out there? Is that all like the baseball stadium?
They've also got a GSK plant out there.
But they're growing fast, so I bet you they're gonna make more residential out there.
but Roseville was always kind of, Roseville was residential, so. You know, Algebra Roseville Elementary.
Good information. Perfect.
You're like,
No, I mean, it really is.
all right.
slide.
So it was a nice way to say next slide. All right. Upcoming budget dates. So if you guys are fine with everything that we have presented and how it's presented, we're gonna go ahead and move forward with finalizing some of the other budget documents to get us closer to our final budget book. If you have any updates or revisions, then we kind of need to know that. We'll spend the next week going ahead and getting those implemented and getting an updated draft budget online. We'll have the public hearing May 23rd for the recommended budget. We can schedule a second budget workshop if you guys deem that necessary. And we're looking at June 13th for budget and CIP adoption. So please don't move that to the second meeting in June because that's too close to the end of the fiscal year for me. But so our preference would be to keep that June 17th. So, and outside that, we've got our final quote. So, which may be too soon, but we're gonna roll with it.
Thanks.
Look at that, look at that.
Mhm.
Oh, look at that. Great job by everyone. Thank you so much.
Takes a village. We've got a good village.
Great. Any other feedback before we adjourn? Questions? Councilman? Hearing none. All right, these adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Outside lot.
Um,